Hello everyone. Welcome to another part of What If Deku ran an orphanage. If you enjoy the story, please like, subscribe, and share the video. It really helps me out. I did not write the story. The original writer is Kyodon. Please go support them. Now let us dive in. Fukinoko Midoriya. Fukinoko, or just Fuku as she calls herself, is an 8-year-old girl with purple hair. She is the second most mysterious member of the family. The first being Mu, more on him later, and the third being Eri. She stays in her room pretty much constantly, only really coming out at night to sneak into the kitchen. I've only interacted with her in person once and it didn't go very well, so she avoids me. Even now that she's started coming out of her room more often with a special hoodie on that covers her face, she still stays clear of me. Still looking for a way to make it up to her. But from what I've heard and seen, she's very easily frightened and extremely paranoid, which is why doesn't leave her room. And she also puts herself down a lot. Although I heard she's been getting better and becoming less scared. Her quirk is called fear gas. Fukinoko can emit a gas from her skin that causes almost whoever breathes it to hallucinate their worst fears. It's bad enough to drive people insane. Although it fades away fast, the dangerous part is that this gas explodes from her whenever she panics, which is a lot. Again, she's been working on it with Dad, but it's still very scary. Note, her quirk doesn't work on the undead, in other words. Me. Kai Midoriya. Kai is very interesting. He's 40 feet tall, with 3 massive heads. 2 wings, 2 legs, and no arms. His body is like a snake combined with a dragon and is covered in massive green scales. Also his blood in poison. Don't know how strong it is, but Izuku just said it's very strong. Kai can talk and see and do everything we do with one head using all 3 of his, but he doesn't have 3 separate personalities, just the one. Since he also lacks hands, he has to use his heads to grab things, which can go badly sometimes. You'd think he'd cause a lot of damage to people or things around him, but actually Kiba is way worse than him. Kai is very gentle and kind, and always tries to be extremely careful, which is good because he's so big. It can be weird looking at how big he is and knowing he's only 7 years old. It confuses me how a literally 40-foot Hydra with no hands can do less damage when he tries to pick something up than Kiba. Otoko Midoriya. Otoko is 7 years old and his body looks like it's made of some kind of weird moss. It's not actually moss though. Don't really know what it is. It's like some flesh-moss fusion thing. He's also tall. Like really tall. He's like twice Izuku's height. And he has this weird tentacle on his face? With big bug eyes? It makes him scarier, which goes into his quirk. Anything that feels fear burns at Otoko's touch. Or rather, if you feel a certain amount of fear and touch Otoko, you will suddenly catch fire. He wears a special cloak over his body so people don't touch him, although it can make him a bit scarier looking because it darkens his face. Otoko is pretty gentle and likes quiet. He most hangs out in the greenhouse, the library, and the art room, and occasionally the pool when there aren't too many people around. I can relate. Also notable, he can't set Sansan on fire, most likely because she is a liquid. Mu Midoriya. Okay, I've never actually seen Mu. He's like Fukinoko, he doesn't like to talk to people. But apparently he does like to be around people. Mu's quirk is complicated. Dad said it lets him slip into another state or reality where no one can see or touch him, but he can see other people and he can go through objects. He's a ghost. He's basically a ghost. And he likes to go around while invisible and just look at people, according to Dad. Oh, and an important thing, anything that goes into this other state of reality will start to fall apart pretty quickly. And even Mu will eventually start to fall apart, but that takes a lot longer. Yonda Midoriya. Yonda is the ultimate privacy destroyer. And she embraces that. She's a 9-year-old girl with curly pink hair. Her quirk replaces her ability to hear and speak with sound with the ability to hear people's thoughts and speak in their minds. And no, she can't turn it off. Apparently it still works a lot like regular hearing and speaking. It has the same range, and if you cover her ears and keep her mouth from moving, she can't hear or talk. Which is weird because her quirk goes through walls. Maybe her ears and mouth are kinda like antennas or something. Because if you just cover her mouth, she can still talk using her quirk. You have to actually stop her mouth from moving at all to silence her. Same with her ears, you can't just put your hands over them to stop them, you have plugged them up to make them unable to hear. In terms of personality, she has 2 sides to her. One side is absolutely evil and uses her quirk to manipulate people. Kiba has fallen prey to this multiple times, and let's just say Yonda has never really had to lift anything heavy because of it. Although evil is an exaggeration. It's mostly just minor stuff. She doesn't do this often, but if she wants something or someone to do something, she will get them to do it. Although times when she does this are kinda rare. Most of the time she's pretty nice, using her quirk to try and help people with their problems. Breaking up fights between Kiba and however Kiba pissed off that day. Kyosei Midoriya. Kyosei lives inside of me. Yes, you read that right. Kyosei is a living blob of black ooze that is about a year old. Kinda like Sanson but stickier and black. His quirk allows him to go inside people and basically make it his home. This is called a bond and it comes with upsides and downsides. The person he's inside, called the host. The upside is that it gives the host super strength, speed, durability, etc. It also lets them use Kyosei's body as armor or weapons. No ally, it lets you make tentacles that can stretch about 30 feet. The downside is that he makes you insane by enhancing your emotions and eventually kills you by eating all your insides. So for most people it's not really worth it. Except for me, whose emotions are mostly dead and whose insides constantly regenerate. So I get all the plus sides and none of the negatives. Well, except for Kyosei's weakness, fire, and really loud sounds, I still have to watch out for that. Personality-wise, he's a baby. Literally, he's like a year old. All he really wants is to eat and for me to be active. Mind you, he can understand people and he has intelligence, so one day he'll have more of a personality. Netsu Midoriya. Netsu is a 7-year-old boy who is constantly on fire. His quirk allows him to emit fire and shoot it out like Endeavor while also making him immune to fire. He's extremely powerful and one day he will get more powerful than Endeavor ever could be. The downside is that while he is immune to fire, his lungs are not immune to smoke or a lack of oxygen. Turns out fire is pretty bad for your breathing, so if he makes too much fire in a closed area, then he'll suffocate himself. Also, his quirk is incredibly hard to control. So it's almost impossible for him to go a day without setting something on fire, and it's pretty easy for him to lose control when he's attacking. He can also use his quirk to fly, although due to his difficulty controlling his quirk, he often crashes into things when he tries. Personality-wise, Netsu is a lot like an anime protagonist. Simple-minded, likes to fight and eat. Although apparently he has an interest in art, which I didn't see coming. Most powerful list update. 1. Sanson. Still really powerful and hard to hurt. 2. Yami. I really underestimated what Yami could do. The amount of negative energy he can get just by being in the city for a few hours is insane, and the types of grim he can create keep getting weirder and more powerful. He gets stronger every day. It's very possible he could be more powerful than Sanson, but I'm putting him lower because if you actually manage to get to him through all the grim, he can't really fight for himself. 3. Kai/Kiba/Netsu. It's hard to tell who is more powerful here. They all have advantages and disadvantages, but roughly speaking they're around the same power. 4. Me and Kyosei. Thanks to Kyosei I've gotten a lot stronger. Combined with my regeneration we're really hard to fight. Although my regeneration is still limited and fire and loud sounds can mess us up. 5. Shiruku. She has a lot of the same powers I do now if you replace tentacles with webs, except I think she's still a bit stronger and faster than me. But I regenerate and she doesn't, so she goes one spot lower. 6K/Mu. It's really hard for me to place these two. Because they don't have any real fighting ability, but their quirks can be an instant win in a lot of situations. If either of them catch you by surprise, they win basically unless your quirk counters there somehow. But Mu might have a hard time pulling people into his realm, and if you can get close to K without looking at her you can beat her pretty easily. 7. Fukinoko. Her gas dissipates really quickly and is really short range. But if you do breathe it in you are beyond screwed. 8. Eri. She can kill you with a touch. But she has to get close to you. She can also heal people eventually. She still has to work on that. 9. Otoko. Same as Eri, but Eri's touch will instantly and definitely kill you no matter what. But Otoko first has to make you feel afraid of him, and even then if he touches you just get set on fire which will probably kill you be it might not. Also he can't heal people. 10. Yonda. Not really a combat quirk, but she could probably use it to see what an opponent's strategy is. Not much, but it's something. 11. Kyoku. Again, not really a combat quirk. Can't really use it too well in a fight. Tragic backstory list. 1. Eri. 2. Sanson. 3. K. 4. Fukinoko. 5. Me/Kiba/Yami. Tai. 6. Kyoku. 7. Dad. 8. Yonda. 9. Shiruka/Kai/Otoko. 10. Kyosei. He did accidentally drive his mom crazy and kill her, but he really didn't understand what was happening and still doesn't. He is a baby, so we'll have to see how that affects him in the future. 11. Mu. I don't know what his backstory is. Money problems? It was early in the morning and Izuku was at his desk, doing paperwork. Izuku liked to get up very early so he could get stuff done before he had to make breakfast. The paperwork he was dealing with now was actually not something directly related to the children or the damages they cause. This particular mountain of paperwork he was doing was securing income. Now one would think Izuku, being a humble, selfless person who was also extremely rich, money would be the last thing on his mind. However, Izuku had come to realize that most of his money came from the government. He'd used up most of the thanks for taking down the Yakuza money by now, and his mother and the government were the only sources of income he had. And both of those weren't necessarily reliable. His mother's company was doing okay, but that could take a turn for the worst at some point. And the government was known for screwing people out of money. And while he was confident they couldn't do that to him, seeing that their contract said that as long as he was taking care of any OPC they were to give him money, he'd heard tales of people more confident than him who'd had the rug pulled under them. And were left with nothing. Now compare that to the amount of money he would need to spend to keep this operation going, were the government to stop supporting him. The cost of food, the cost of maintaining the massive house they live in, the cost of repairing the massive house they live in, the cost of fixing up the land around the house whenever it got too badly damaged, the cost of paying employees and maintaining their benefits when he eventually got some, and the absolutely enormous cost that came with maintaining all the kids' special needs like Kiba's blood, Kei's visors, Sanson's chemicals, Netsu's fireproof clothes and items, Fukunoko's special room, the antidotes to Fukunoko's gas, Kai's everything. And those costs only increased with each kid he took in. But that was just the cost of the essentials. Izuku wanted to give these kids the best life he could, which included buying lots of video games, regular games, and sports equipment and training equipment. On top of paying for all the stuff that came with each child's personal interests like Kiba's streaming equipment and Shiroku's dressmaking equipment. In summary, Izuku needs to be rich at all times for this to work. So the more income, the better Izuku felt. Of course, there was Aries blood. While that money was also from the government, Izuku was much more confident that the government would continue. Why? Because it saved them a crap ton of cash. As mentioned, the cost of taking care of an OPC was a lot, and level 2 OPCs even more so. Meaning unless Izuku ramped up the price for Aries blood by 300%, they'd be saving so much money. Then there was the more conventional way rich people got richer. Investing. This, as expected, got Izuku a lot of money. And then there were the more specialized means that involved his children. Shiroku often had a lot of leftover webbing and rejected or unfinished clothes made out of those webs, which the spider girl considered to be trash. Most of the world did not share that opinion, as ever since people started getting quirks that allowed them to make webbing, clothes made out of those webs had become luxury items which sold for very high prices. This, combined with the overall rarity of the material, made it so selling large amounts of quirk-produced webbing would make someone a very generous amount of cash. Of course, Izuku asked her permission before doing this, but as one would expect, Shiroku didn't have a problem with her dad selling her trash. Fu's remains were also something he sold sometimes. Something he found about Fu is that the boy could not eat his own body parts. His body would literally reject them and throw them back up. So whenever someone would dismember, tear apart, behead, or any of the various things that could be done to the boy that would result in his body parts being thrown around, Izuku was often left with just pieces of human flesh and gallons of blood. He saved the blood for Kiba, and he would sometimes save the flesh for Shiroku, but occasionally he was left with so much of it that he would just sell it online, where it would then go to people with flesh-eating quirks. All these methods required, of course, a lot of paperwork. Which is what he was doing now. Izuku laid his head on the desk for a moment and closed his eyes. He didn't need sleep, he told himself. His body wasn't screaming at him to get the hell back in bed, he told himself. He was fine, he told himself. He opened his eyes and looked at the clock and sighed. In 5 minutes he had to make food, meaning he would have to finish up the paperwork. Izuku took a deep breath and quickly got back to work. Today would be a busy day. He would need a lot of coffee. Morning lessons. All right everyone, please hand in your homework, Izuku told them from behind his teacher's desk. In front of him were Eri, Kei, Kiba, Fu, Kyoku, Shiroku, Yami, Otoko, Yanda, Netsu, and Ken, all in desks in front of him. After feeding everyone in the house, it was time for class. Some of the kids were more ecstatic about this than others, and by that he meant Kiba and Ken really didn't want to be here. Speaking of people not being here, Izuku had decided that Fuku, Kai, Mu, and Nara didn't need to attend. Fuku wasn't here for obvious reasons. She most likely wouldn't be able to stay conscious in a room with this many people, let alone learn anything. He would have to give her private lessons later on. Kai also wasn't here for obvious reasons. Izuku would again give him private lessons. Mu was pretty much the same case as Fuku. Lastly, Nara wasn't here simply because she didn't need to be. To put it simply, she was a level above all the other kids in terms of her studies, and she was still determined to study and learn even more on her own, so Izuku just left her to her own devices for now, much to her brother's displeasure. Speaking of Ken, he wasn't dumb. But it was clear that most of his intelligence was dedicated to figuring out ways to fight people rather than any academic pursuits. This could be seen by the fact that everyone else had brought their homework to the front except him and Kiba. Izuku sighed. Ken. Kiba. Why is it that your homework isn't here with everyone else's? Oh, I forgot. Ken obviously lied. Ha! To think you could be so empty-headed. Caretaker, I apologize for my homework's disappearance, but I have a perfectly reasonable explanation. Kiba cleared her throat. The Grim ate it. Yami raised an eyebrow. They're lying. Ken ignored it and Kiba forgot. Yanda told him. Both the called-out kids immediately turned towards Yanda and glared at her harshly. I kind of figured, but thank you, Yanda. Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose as he felt an intense headache coming on. You too, see me after class. The two looked very, very displeased and were still glaring daggers at Yanda, who looked incredibly smug. All right, today we'll be learning about biology, Izuku told them, and he pressed a button on a remote and the blackboard flipped around, becoming a large screen. And to do so, we'll be watching a show called Cells at Work. Izuku tried his best to make sure his lessons were fun. And he put a lot of work into his lesson plans. Because after all, how could he expect the kids to put in the effort if he didn't? 4 hours later. Class was now done. Of course, his classes were drastically shorter than most school days due to him cutting out all the unnecessary fluff that schools were forced to teach kids for no good reason. It also helped that they all lived in the same house, so if anyone had any questions they could come to him. However, while most of the kids left, 2 remained. Kiba and Ken looking mighty unhappy. Let's start with Kiba. Izuku decided that going one at a time would be better, more precise, and allowed him to focus more on certain things. Kiba, I know you don't forget to do these on purpose. But I also know the reason you keep forgetting is because you don't think it's important. Well, it isn't. Kiba pouted and crossed her arms. Yeah, if we're gonna be heroes then we won't need to do any of the stupid math stuff. Ken argued. You two do realize that to get into any hero school you have to pass a written exam, right? Izuku pointed out. Both their eyes widened and it looked like he just told them they had a terminal disease. What? They both shouted. Yeah. It's a test with a variety of subjects from math to science to history. Izuku explained. And no matter how powerful your quirk is or how well you do on the practical exam, if you don't pass the written exam, then you don't get in. That's so lame. Ken shouted out in protest. Why does it matter if we're good at math and science and all that if we're strong? That is illogical. Kiba objected. Are you sure about that? Izuku asked them. Kiba, did you know that if you hit the air hard enough and fast enough, you can shoot out a blast of air? Or you can kick the air below you to propel yourself, meaning you could basically fly. Kiba's eyes went wide once more, this time with wonder rather than horror. Really? Izuku nodded. That's right. All Might does it all the time, and you want to know how he figured that out? By learning physics and science. If you want to be number one, then you have to not only learn how to control your quirk, but learn about how it interacts with the world around you. And that means learning things like math and science. He then turned to Ken. And you should be especially motivated to learn about math because your quirk has a time limit. PSH, what does that matter? I'll just take down all the villains before my time runs out. Ken said arrogantly. Ken, we both know that that's not always possible. Izuku sighed and took a moment to think of something. All right then, Ken, if you can answer this hero problem, then I'll excuse you from classes. Ken peeked up. Wait, really? Izuku nodded. All right, bring it on. Ken challenged, confident in his ability to take on anything hero-related. All right, villains are attacking a park in the city. And the only heroes there are you and a hero with reconnaissance, that means gathering information, quirk, who can't fight very well, and you are in your feedback form. The reconnaissance hero tells you that there are 18 villains with 8 hostages. The villains are in 8 groups of 2. 7 groups have a hostage and the final group has the group's leader. The groups are spread around the park around 10 blocks away from each other, and it would take you about 10 seconds to defeat each villain. You have 10 minutes left in your transformation. What do? A. Charge in and try to fight all the villains and save all the hostages. Or B. Wait around the park's exit so the villains don't escape, so backup can arrive and take down the villains? Izuku asked. Ken seemed to think about that for a moment, but after a few moments he made an expression that told him what he was thinking. Why am I even thinking about this? The answer is obvious. And then he said exactly what Izuku thought he would say. The first one. I just have to kick their ass as fast as I can. Ken answered. Wrong, Izuku said swiftly. Here's where math comes in. First, you take the total amount of area you have to cover. In that case, you would have to run 9 blocks. Then you also take in the amount of time you take to defeat all the villains. Then you take in feedback's maximum speed. Putting all that together into an equation, and you'll see that it would take you over 10 minutes to do all that. Meaning you'd transform back into your normal form before it was done, and the villains would almost certainly kill you. So the wiser option would be to make sure the villains don't escape while backup arrives. Ken wanted to argue. Because just sitting around and making sure villains didn't move sounded so much lamer than charging in and taking down all the bad guys. But what Izuku said also made too much sense for him to logically refute. That is one of the many situations where math is important as a hero. And I drastically simplified it for you. It's unlikely you'd be able to know that many details, so you'd have to make multiple calculations for multiple scenarios and adjust them accordingly on the fly. For example, if one of those villains happens to have a powerful endurance quirk and would take a while to beat, you have to estimate how long it would take you to beat him if you could at all, how much time you have after, and determine if it's smarter to maneuver around the villain and save the hostage and then move on to save more hostages. Izuku continued. A miscalculation, or worse not making a calculation, with a quirk like yours can kill you. Ken once again didn't say a word, instead just choosing to pout in frustration. It was another case of he couldn't refuse what Izuku was saying, but he didn't want to admit he was right. Listen, I'll admit. Schools teach you a lot of useless information that you'll never need to know. It was scary to Izuku just how much time schools wasted teaching people things that no one needed to know unless that happened to get into a very specific field, rather than anything useful like how to deal with finances, first aid, or human rights and the laws of the country you live in. But I've done my best to trim away all the useless stuff you guys don't need while giving you everything you do need to learn and making sure you understand it. Which is what this homework is for. I can't go to all of you individually and make sure you understand what I'm telling you, so this is how I make sure. So I need you two to take this seriously. Both kids still looked unhappy, but in a different way. It was clear that they had gotten the message and understood things better now, but they just didn't like what they were hearing. If you two continue to ignore the few responsibilities I give you, then I will have no choice but to take away your streaming and gaming privileges. Izuku saw fear light up in their eyes after he said that, as it seemed they were finally gonna start getting their acts together. I'll be giving you this homework to do as makeup work along with today's homework. Suddenly Izuku was interrupted by another coughing fit and pain in his chest. He quickly turned around and covered his mouth while leaning on the blackboard. Immediately the mood in the room changed and Kiba and Ken both became a bit concerned. Caretaker, are you ill? Kiba rushed over to his side, but Izuku held his hand out to stop her from getting too close and seeing the blood coming out of his mouth and his pained expression. I'm fine. Izuku's words were broken up by coughs and pain as he tried to catch his breath and not succumb to his weakening body and fall to his knees. Somehow he managed to pull himself together and the fit subsided. Although a lot of chest pain still remained, he just powered through it. All right, I'm gonna go take some cough medicine. You two do your homework. Izuku then left in a hurry, never turning towards them as he ran out of the room. The two children stood there for a bit, not really sure what to make of that. Hey Kiba, is it just me or is Izuku hiding something? Like, something bad? Ken waited for a response, but Kiba didn't give him one, instead just standing there. Kiba. I smelled blood, Kiba said. Something is horribly wrong. Making calls. After spending a few hours cleaning up the blood coming out of his mouth, grading all the homework, tutoring the kids who missed out on class, and spending some time doing quirk training for Eri and Netsu, it was time for him to look at the order list. The order list was a list that was on a bulletin board in the hallways where the children's rooms were. It contained everything the kids wanted Izuku to buy for that week. There were a lot of requests weekly, most of which were pretty standard. Shiruku asked for more dressmaking supplies. Ken would ask for games, Kiba would ask for various items relating to her streaming hobby. But of course, sometimes they would request things that either Izuku couldn't or wouldn't buy. Netsu had somehow heard about Trigger and requested that, and that led to Izuku having to spend an entire class talking about why not to do drugs. Kei had requested a chicken coop so she could have unlimited eggs, and then Izuka had to explain to her why that wasn't an option. And Kyosei would occasionally try to ask for chocolate, writing it on the board whenever Fu passed by and wasn't looking behind him. But really the bulk of the unreasonable request came from two kids. One of them was unsurprisingly Kiba, who requested things like a castle, wine, a weather control machine so she could make lightning strikes whenever she introduced herself, and a request to build a moat of blood around the house. She was still asking to the castle to this day. The other one was surprisingly enough Fuku, who despite her rich background, or maybe because of it, didn't seem to know how money worked and thought that you could buy anything. Most of her unreasonable requests weren't for physical objects, although she did at one point ask for a rocket ship so she could isolate herself in space, but were for things like happiness, courage, and determination. And so Izuka took the paper off the board and started reading it over. Alright, looks mostly reasonable aside from Kiba's usual castle request. Izuka walked over to his office and sat behind his desk as he reached for his phone. It was time for him to order supplies. Not just the list of things the kids wanted, but all the other things the house needed. Firstly, he needed to take stock of their food, check how much they had, how much would expire, and what they had to throw out, and what they could feed to Fu before they check on what they needed to order. Before, he had to do all this checking and inspecting manually, taking stock of every bit of food himself, but now he could do it all from his desk thanks to the seers. And when he ordered food, he didn't just order what they needed. He had to order a lot of surplus food. For two reasons: one, if something happened and the food got stolen or damaged or set on fire, then they wouldn't starve. Second, he always had to be ready in case DOC sent more children. He also had to take stock to see if there was enough protective equipment for the kids. Kei's visor, Netsu's fireproof clothes, gas masks, and things of that nature. And once that was done, he could finally make some calls to place orders for all of this stuff. And once that was done, he then moved on to house maintenance. Firstly, he'd have the seers go out all around the house, Kai's room, the storehouse, the greenhouse, and inspect them for damages. Once that was done, he filed everything into a comprehensive list. Then he called one of the construction companies he did business with, mostly the Urarakas, and asked them to fix it. Speaking of the Urarakas, being a small construction company from a small town that was adjusting to a new environment and new scale of construction altogether, they sometimes lacked supplies, meaning Izuka would have to purchase them himself, which meant more paperwork and phone calls. This embarrassed the Urarakas horribly, and they promised that after some reformatting of their company this wouldn't happen again. He felt horrible for making them do all that work, but on the bright side, after the shot in the arm he gave them, they were doing much better and were on the path to becoming a bigger, more successful company. Back to the topic of work, after all that was done, it was time for reforestation. Izuka once again sent out the seers, who were such a godsend, into the forest to check the areas where the kids had been, for trees they damaged or destroyed. Then he would make a call to have all the damaged trees chopped down, the stumps to be pulled out, all the fallen trees to be taken away, and for everything to be replanted afterward. Then once that was done, he was finally finished with ordering supplies and maintenance. This all had to be done bi-weekly. Unless of course one of the kids did something that would cause him to do it sooner, which happened often, so really it felt like instead of it happening every 2 weeks, he felt like he did twice a week. He had to do it fast though, because after this he still had to do all the paperwork for the cure branch, literally deciding the fates of some people's entire lives. So he had a lot still ahead of him. As he was looking over the last part of the list, he saw something that made him pause. A maid. Someone had requested a maid. And next to that request was the sentence, "You need help, Dad?" Immediately Izuka's head fell onto the desk. He felt like a failure. It was very apparent that the kids were concerned about his health. Yami had taken it upon himself to spend his time making new Grim to help him. Children should not spend their time worrying about the health of their parents. They should be free to play and do as they wish, learning about the wonders of the world around them until they grow up to be well-adjusted adults and live happy lives. If he couldn't let them do that, then what was he even doing? Suddenly he started coughing again. Damn it, when I said I wanted to be like All Might, this is not what I meant. Izuka thought his blood flew out of his mouth. And then everything went wrong. Thud. Suddenly the little energy Izuka had seemed to leave his body as he collapsed onto his desk. What? It became very hard to breathe as pain racked his body, and it felt like he was choking on his own blood. The last thing he thought before he fainted was, "I failed." And then everything went black for him. However, as it turns out, someone was listening to his thoughts at that moment. Outside the office a few moments ago, Yanda walked up the steps to her father's office. determined to make him get some sleep. I failed. She barely heard. She frowned before moving faster towards his office, stopping right outside the door. Father, I'm coming in. No response. Father? Yonda was confused. It wasn't like he couldn't hear her. She was in range for her quirk to take effect, and she was literally speaking in his head. Father, are you already sleeping? No response. Yonda started to get worried. Something was wrong. She wasn't hearing anything. Which meant one of three things. 1. Either Izuku was in dreamless sleep, he wasn't here, or he was dead. And it was very unlike her father to sleep so early, well, early for him anyway, and he was normally here at this time. She might have been just being paranoid, but she wanted to make sure that was the case. So she opened the door, and was met with the sight of Izuku, limp on a desk that was dripping blood. Everyone in the house was woken up by a psychic scream ringing in their heads. Fu was just walking through the kids' living quarters back to his room after eating in the kitchen when he heard the scream. Aye. It was the loudest he had ever heard Yonda, and it immediately pushed him into alert mode. Yonda, what's wrong? He thought. But there was no response. Quickly he heard the doors around him open, and Sansen, Yami, Kiba, Netsu, and Shiruku came out in their pajamas. Except obviously Sansen. What was that? Kiba asked in a panic. That sounded like Yonda screaming, Shiruka said. But I don't see her anywhere. Netsu looked around. She's not responding to my thoughts either, Fu told them, getting more and more concerned. There you are. Fu turned around and saw Nara running towards them with Eri, Otoko, Kyoku, and Kei with her. All still in their pajamas much like the others. Except for Otoko, who had hurriedly thrown his cloak on. What happened? Is Yonda all right? Eri asked, clearly fearful for her sister. We don't know. I haven't seen her and she's not responding. Fu once again explained. Looking at Nara's group, he noticed someone was missing. Where's Ken? Probably still snoozing. Nara shook her head disapprovingly. When he goes to sleep, almost nothing wakes him up. But enough about him, we need to find Yonda. Just then, Mu came out of his dimension in front of everyone, scaring the crap out of them as it looked like he appeared out of thin air. Help! Dad, Yonda, the office. Help! Mu shouted at them, appearing disheveled and was hyperventilating. Apparently, that was all Mu could take as he almost immediately ducked back into his dimension. Who was that? Nara asked. Almost everyone else looked unsure as well, seeing as only Fuku had really personally seen Mu. I think that was Mu, he looks like how Dad described him. Fu answered, it looks like something went wrong with Dad and Yonda in his office. We should hurry, it must have been serious for Mu to show himself like that. Kiba threw back to yesterday. With the blood she smelled coming from her father. And immediately fear gripped her as she put 2 and 2 together. And so without a word, which was unlike her, she bolted towards Izuku's office. Naturally, no one else really could catch up to her, and she made her way to Izuku's office. She kicked the door off its hinges and was met with a horrifying sight. There in her father's office were Izuku and Yonda. Both passed out and were unconscious. Yonda was mostly fine, it seemed like she had passed out from shock. The real horror was with Izuku, who was limp on his desk that was dripping with his blood. For a moment Kiba was frozen in shock. Horror gripping her heart. Never has the sight of blood looked so unappealing to her. The paralysis didn't last long as she dashed forward, grabbing the desk and throwing it aside, letting Izuku fall on top of her. Daddy! Kiba quickly laid Izuku out on the floor. She saw that the blood was coming from his mouth and not a stab wound or anything, but that was little comfort as he was still bleeding and not responding. Kiba started to hyperventilate as she lowered her ear to his chest, and much to her relief his heart was still beating. But after that she didn't know what to do. She tried shaking Izuku, but he wasn't responding at all. And the longer this went on, the more she panicked. Daddy! Kiba started crying, scared out of her mind for her adopted father. Meanwhile, everyone else, Fu, Nara, Eri, Otoko, Shiruku, Netsu, Sansen, Kyoku, Kei, and Yami all caught up, and saw Kiba weeping over Izuku's limp body with blood on his face. The reactions varied. Yami, Kei, Netsu, and Shiruku all ran over to his body, all screaming out in concern. Eri and Kyoku just stood there, too afraid and panicked to even move. Sansen just melted. She was so shocked by this that she was unable to maintain her form and thus just turned into a pile of goo on the floor. Nara, Fu, and Otoko were all standing in shock, although not for very long. Fu, predictably, was the first one to take charge. Someone get Dad's phone and call an ambulance. Fu shouted out to the others. He looked at the desk that Kiba had thrown aside and saw that the phone had been tossed aside nearby. He uses one of Kyosiai's tentacles to pick up the phone. Luckily, it wasn't broken. After typing in the password, which only he and a few others knew in case of emergency, he called for help, all while watching his siblings panic and cry. If one could see it, the only word that could be used to describe it was disaster. Sometime later, Fuku had a feeling something was wrong. Firstly, this was normally around the time someone would bring her breakfast, whether it be Izuku, Kei, or Eri. But today they were late. Very late. Did I do something wrong? Oh no, what did I do? Are they gonna leave me to starve? Oh God. Fuku was naturally beginning to panic, and that is when there was a knock on the door. It's me and Eri, can you let us in? It was Kei, and something was wrong. She was lacking her usual peppiness. And Kei was never lacking in peppiness. Concern bubbled up inside her, alongside her fears. What is Kei so sad about? Is it something involving me? Is Izuka getting rid of me? What could they be so sad about? 1,000 fearful thoughts flew through her head, but all of them only lasted for a second before they were silenced by one singular thought. Stupid Fuku. Your friends are hurting. What else could possibly matter? And so, with more confidence than she ever felt in most of her life, she went over and opened the door. When the door opened, she was met with a sight that broke her heart. Kei was trying to keep herself together, and if Fuku was an idiot, she might have believed she was okay, given that her visor covered her teary eyes and Kei was wearing a forced smile. But the smile was very obviously forced. The snakes on her head were slumped over and sad. Eri was barely even trying to hide her distress. Her normally ruby-red eyes were bloodshot red, and she could still see the tear tracks on her face. Her hair was an absolute mess, as she was still wearing her pajamas. She hid behind Kei as if trying not to let Fuku see her in such a way. Never in her life has she seen her closest friends look so defeated, and all she could ask was, "What happened?" Dad he got sick, and he was bleeding, and Kei tried to explain it, but she was very evidently falling apart, and Eri wasn't doing much better as she started tearing up behind her. He's in the hospital, an. Fuku didn't let her continue and instead just brought the two inside and wrapped them into a hug. The other two immediately hugged her back and started sobbing. Fuku liked Izuku. Heck, she even kind of looks up to him. So hearing that something like this had happened was horrible. But she knew that to Kei and Eri, he was their father, and she couldn't imagine how they must feel. So she pushed her own feelings aside. She could worry and cry about Izuku later. Her precious friends needed her. And so she grasped onto strength she never knew she had and carried on. Meanwhile, in Kai's room, Kai woke up with a huge yawn. It was a beautiful day outside. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and the kaiju boy was confident that today would be another wonderful day. And then the world sent Fu in there to tell him otherwise. Fu looked as he normally would, so Kai didn't suspect that anything was wrong. But on the inside, well, calling him a mess would be inaccurate. Due to his quirk holding back his emotions, he wasn't overwhelmed by sadness and fear, but the sadness and fear were present, as well as a deep feeling of frustration. Fu, good morning. Kai eagerly greeted his older brother. Is Kiba doing another stream? Kai was such a good boy. Such a good, happy, nice boy. And it killed Fu to have to say what he was going to say. But he already died once, so what was another one? No. I don't think Kiba's gonna be streaming for a while. Fu sighed. Kai gave him confused looks. He has 3 heads, so it looks not look. Kiba not streaming? That's not like her at all. Wait. She's not sick, is she? Fu shook his head. No, she's not sick, but Dad is. The giant boy's 3 sets of eyes widened with concern and fear. What? Dad's sick. He was bleeding and he wouldn't wake up, so we had to get him to the hospital, Fu explained to him, looking away so he didn't have to see Kai's expression. Waha. Why? Tears started leaking out of Kai's eyes, hitting the ground like huge raindrops the size of toddlers. One of them fell onto Fu, drenching him instantly. As Kai sobbed, Fu decided to comfort him. So after a bit of climbing using Kyosei's tentacles, Fu made his way to Kai's head and gently hugged the top of his skull. Meanwhile, in Ken's room, Ken was currently fast asleep on his bed, snoozing without a care in the world. And then he was pushed off his bed onto the floor. Ow! Ken jolted awake from the pain of his noggin crashing onto the ground and was immediately irritated with whoever did that. And he already knew who it was. Wake up! Nara shouted at him, staring down at him anxiously. What the heck was that for? Ken pulled himself to his feet and glared daggers at his sister. Izuka got sick and had to go to the hospital. I need you to get up so we can figure out what to do now. Nara swiftly explained, trying to convey the urgency of the situation as much as she could in as little time as possible. Wait, what? If Ken was not fully awake before, he was now. Izuku's sick, what happened to him? We don't know. All we know is that we heard Yonda screaming and we found her passed out from shock and Izuku passed out bleeding on his desk. He wasn't waking up so we had to call the hospital to take him away. Nara explained once again as quickly as she could. I think he overworked himself. I mean he is the only employee here. Oh man, Ken muttered, his eyes wide in shock. Ken and Nara hadn't known Izuku for very long, but they'd come to like him as a guardian figure that watched over them. So him being in this state was a real bummer, to say the least. Most of the other kids are panicking, it's chaos out there. Me and the other kids who aren't freaking out are all meeting in the cafeteria to figure out what to do. That includes you. Nara threw some clothes at him. So get dressed. Ken, for once, quickly did what she told him to do without complaint, before following her to the cafeteria. A few moments later, in the cafeteria, Ken, Nara, Fu, and Otoko were all gathered, sitting down at one of the lunch tables. There was a seer orb next to Nara, just so that way she could keep tabs over the house. Why are you wet? Ken asked Fu, whose entire body was still soaked. I had to tell Kai about what happened to Dad and he started crying, Fu explained. As you can see, his tears are as big as you'd expect. Let's focus here, guys. Nara brought everyone's attention to her. First, where's everyone and what are they doing? Last I checked, Eri and Kei were with Fukunoko, crying. Kai is in his room, also crying. Kiba, Kyoku, and Yami have locked themselves in their rooms and are probably crying. Netsu and Sanson have gone outside to vent out some stress and probably also cry. Shiruku is in her room trying to keep it together while stress-eating and crying. Yonda is still passed out but she'll probably wake up and cry, and I have no idea where Mu is but he's probably either in his room or in his dimension, crying. Fu explained. So everyone but us is freaking out and crying. Ken summarized. Great. Suddenly Ken's stomach growled, setting off a chain reaction of people of stomach growls. Okay, the second thing we need to figure out. Who is making food? Nara asked them all. Because Ken and I can't cook. Hey Fu, isn't your whole thing that you eat a ton of food? Don't you know how to cook? Ken asked the zombie boy hopefully while clutching his stomach. Fu shook his head. I can't get sick and I can't taste anything. So I just eat all my food raw. Gross. Nara cringed before everyone turned to Otoko. Otoko shook his head, signifying that he indeed could not cook. Everyone wilted a bit as they realized they may have a situation on their hands. I think Yonda and Yami know how to cook but they're out of commission. Fu sighed. And the only other one who can cook is Dash. Me, said an unfamiliar voice from the entrance. Everyone looked towards the door and saw Fuku walking in with her hoodie over her face. Fuku. Fu was actually shocked. He figured that Fuku would have definitely stayed in her room with Eri and Kei for a long time, maybe even days. Isn't that the super shy girl that hides in her room all day every day? Ken asked bluntly. Yup, that's her, Fu confirmed. What happened to Kei and Eri? They're with Kyoku. I wanted to help, Fuku admitted. You need someone who can cook, right? Well, I know how. If that's all right with everyone. Hey, I'm not complaining about not going hungry. Do what you want. Ken told her. Yeah, thank you for coming. We really appreciate the help. Nara smiled at her, trying to reassure her. Fuku blushed slightly under her hoodie. I'll go into the kitchen now. Just as she was about to run off, Fu spoke up. Wait. Let Otoko come with you, you'll need him to help you get stuff off the tall shelves and lift heavy things. Is that really necessary? In truth, Fuku was already freaking out as it was. She desperately wanted to run back to her room but she was determined to stick around and help, if only for Eri and Kei's sake, also her own because if no one was cooking then they would all die of starvation anyway. But she wouldn't lie and say that Otoko's imposing figure and horrifying physique didn't make her have second thoughts. Well, it's either him or you get to deal with the Grim. Fu already knew what her answer was gonna be. Never mind, I'll work with him. Fuku had barely seen the Grim, but from her limited experience with them she knew they were not something she would be comfortable working about, to say the least. Alright, I'll take care of my own and Kai's food by the way. That doesn't really involve any cooking anyway. Fu told her. Alright. Okay. Fuku responded, trying very carefully not to do anything to offend anyone. Can I start cooking now? Yes, go ahead, Fu told her. Immediately Fuku bolted towards the kitchen, running so fast it was a wonder she didn't trip on her way there. Otoko got up from the table and followed her at a significantly slower pace. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, Nara spoke, allowing them to continue the discussion. What do we do now? Did Izuku leave any instructions in case something like this happened? Ken rolled his eyes. Do you really think he'd plan on Dash? Actually he did. Fu pulled out a note from his pocket. Ken crossed his arms while Nara gave him a smug face, but only for a second before getting back to business. Alright, the note is mostly just him apologizing and putting himself down, but the actual instructions say that we should call Grandma and ask her to come over here to take care of us. And if that takes too long, we should ask the wild pussycats for help. Who explained? Wait, isn't that a hero group? Nara asked, confused as to how they would be involved. Izuku would baby Koda, a kid that was under their care. So they kind of owe him one. Who explained? They're weird, but they're pretty good at their jobs and they know how to do all the adult stuff. So we should just focus on holding out until they get here. Alright. Until then, the three of us should take on all the house chores along with the Grim. Nara ordered. Right? Fu agreed. Right? Ken groaned, hesitantly agreeing. He wasn't a huge fan of doing more work, but he also knew that he didn't really have much of a choice given the situation. Nara sighed. I hope whatever Fukinoko makes is nutritious because I have a feeling I'm going to need the energy. Inko felt like a terrible mother. She left her son, her only son, all the way in another county. And now he had fallen sick. Grandma? Fu said over the phone. Grandma, are you okay? Fu, the dear sweet boy, had been the one to notify her of Izuku's collapse. Seeing as he was the only one of the children who wasn't freaking out, who had also met Inko. Inko wanted to say that she was okay, but she was just so overwhelmed at the moment that all she could do was balk like a fish. Grandma, do we need to call an ambulance for you too? Fu asked her. No dear. Inko managed to say, pulling herself together just enough to finish the conversion. I just need a second. How are all the other children? Most of them are crying. Only 5 of us are keeping everything together right now. But the pussycats are coming to help out until we can figure out what to do. Fu explained to her. Oh dear. Inko bit her lip. She may not have gotten to know all the kids that were now under Izuku's care, but the ones she did know loved their new father with all their hearts. She could only imagine the heartbreak they were going through right now. I'll try to come back as soon as I can. I know it's a lot to ask, but please keep everything together until then. We're trying, Grandma. Fu sighed. Then in the background, Inko heard something break. Oh, I have to go. Sanson broke something again. Goodbye, Fu. I love you. Inko told him. I love you too, Grandma, Fu said before hanging up. Immediately once the conversation was done, Inko stood up from her desk and yelled at her office staff. Everyone, I'll be going back home for a while. My son needs me. Wild pussycats. It was a peaceful morning at Pussycats H.Q, which was given a lot of inappropriate names that they refused to acknowledge. The pussycats themselves were sitting back in their living room enjoying some nice, freshly made coffee. Ah! Mandalay leaned back into the couch. So nice. After so much work we finally get a vacation. Pixie Bob stretched out on the couch, much like a cat. Ahdy. Tiger and Ragdoll's relaxed sighs were their response to that. Pixie Bob turned to Mandalay. Hey, you think we can pawn Koda off on Izuku and have a real vacation? Mandalay turned and gave her teammate a soft glare. I heard that pedo cat. Koda said as he walked into the room. But that's actually a good idea. At least I like being there. Mandalay sighed. Koda's time with Izuku has dulled Koda's edge, so at the very least he wasn't going around looking like he'd stab anyone who looked at him wrong. Now he just looked like he hated everything and everyone around him. Which was true in most situations. Well, I was hoping we could spend a bit more time together since now I have some free time, Mandalay told him, hopefully getting the expected look of disgust from Koda. Brrrr. Mandalay took out her vibrating phone and looked at who was calling. Hi, it's Izuku. That's weird. He rarely calls. She pressed accept and then held up the phone to her ear. Meanwhile, Koda was just hoping that Izuku was calling to get him out of this lame house. What? Mandalay suddenly shouted, startling everyone else in the room. Everyone looked at Mandalay and saw a fearful expression on her face. And immediately a concerned feeling filled the room, most notably in Koda. They watched as Mandalay listened intently for a while before saying, Right? We'll be there as soon as we can. Mandalay hung up and looked at everyone. Izuku collapsed and had to go to the hospital. Everyone's expressions shifted into concern while Koda looked downright terrified. Oh my god, is he okay? Pixie Bob was the first to ask. They don't know. They still haven't heard back from the hospital, so they don't know what his condition is. Mandalay, as a pro-hero, has been in this situation many times before. Someone is taken to the hospital and the waiting period where you don't know what's going on, it's the worst part. She can't even imagine how the kids feel going through this. Speaking of kids, she turned her attention to Kota because he had also been in this situation before and it ended with his parents being dead. And predictably, it looked like Kota was going through a PTSD flashback currently and Mandalay wasn't sure what to do about it. He wrote down that if anything were to happen to him and no one else was around, that he'd like us to help take care of the children until they could work something out, Mandalay explained. But, our vacation? Pixie Bob looked like she was going to cry. Ah, come Pixie. The kittens need us. Ragdoll told her. Vacation or not? We're still heroes and right now there are some children in need. Tiger added. Ahi. Pixie Bob mourned her now lost days off. Fine. Let's go help the kitten. Mandalay's eyes never left Kota. She felt like she should reassure him somehow. Say that Izuku was going to be okay. But she already knew what his response would be, having lived with him long enough. That's what they said about my parents. Achiko. Achiko felt like something was off. Which she shouldn't, because right now her and the girls of 1.A were hanging out having a sleepover at Toru's house. She should be having a blast, and she was. But there was just this nagging feeling in the back of her head that something was wrong and it involved Izuku. Now to be fair, it was just a feeling. She had no real reason to think this other than Izuku's tendency to overwork himself, and while she hadn't heard anything from him in a little while, that was mostly because Izuku thought of himself as a blight on everyone's existence and never called or texted because he thought it would disturb them. Speaking of Izuku. Hey Uraraka, how's your boyfriend? Mina asked with a huge shit-eating grin. Ugh. Mina, if I have to say this again, I'm gonna send you to the moon. He's not my boyfriend. Me and Izuku are just really good friends. Achiko shouted with embarrassment. Op. She never said Izuku. Toru pointed out. Come on, we all know what Mina meant. Sue sighed. Aren't you guys tired of this yet? Yeah, it's like every other time we meet up. Achiko complained, her face still red. Never. Toru and Mina shouted. To be fair, Midoriya is an interesting topic, Momo spoke up. It still bothers me that our government has to rely on a 15-year-old boy to do something they themselves should be capable of, when clearly he needs therapy. Yeah, it still confuses me how the hell that happened, Jiro added. Brrrr. The girls looked at one of Toru's desks where all their phones were placed and saw that Achiko's phone was ringing. It was easy to know which one was hers because she was the only one with a flip phone. $5, it's Midoriya. Mina shouted out eagerly. Achiko sighed and got up to see who it was. It was Izuku. Of all the times to call, Achiko whispered before getting a bit confused. But why is he calling? Not wanting to keep Izuku waiting, Achiko picked up the phone. Hey Izuku. Achiko greeted in her usual friendly voice. Knew it. Mina shouted out in the background. Hey Achiko. Fu was the one on the phone. Not Izuku. I have bad news. Immediately a pang of fear filled her. Wait, what's wrong? Where's Izuku? In the back, all the girls looked confused. And a bit concerned. He got sick, Fu explained. We found him bleeding in his office. And he wasn't waking up. It felt like a bucket of cold water splashed onto her at that moment and then hit her in the gut. What? Achiko was quiet, her voice fearful, more fearful than the girls had ever heard her before. And instantly they knew something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. He's at the hospital. We don't know what's happening with him yet. Fu explained. That's. Achiko was a bit overwhelmed. She didn't know what to say. Achiko? What's wrong? Sue got up to check on her best friend and saw that she was tearing up a bit. Achiko stuttered. I'll give you some time, Fu told her. And I'll call you when we get news about Dad. Goodbye. And with that he hung up. Achiko? Achiko, what's wrong? Sue kept asking her, putting an arm around her to try and comfort her from whatever was happening. Uraraka, what happened? Momo and the rest of the girls soon joined in crowding around her to see what the heck happened. It's Izuku, he's in the hospital. Achiko eventually said after pulling herself back together. They don't know what happened, but he must have overworked himself. I kept telling him over and over to hire some employees. And he didn't listen. Him and his freaking trust issues. Oh my god, I am going to kill Bakugo. All the girls seemed a bit taken aback by this. While I do agree that it's likely Midoriya's affliction was caused by overwork and that Bakugo did play a large part in developing his trust issues, violence won't fix this, Momo told her. Achiko knew this, but she didn't really know what would fix the situation and she was really upset and wanted a reason to punch Bakugo. I think you should sit down, Sue told her. The girls brought her to a chair and had her sit down. They told her that Izuku would be fine. And Achiko agreed. Because she had to believe that that was true. UA staff. The staff members of UA had gathered in the meeting room after hearing about Izuku's collapse. So we're all in agreement that took way longer than it should have. Midnight spoke first. Yeah, hats off to Midoriya, he sure has the endurance of a hero. Snipe could only imagine doing as much paperwork as Izuku did in hell. Can we focus? 13 told everyone before turning to Nizu. Nizu, do you know what exactly is wrong with him? What's his status? I'll be honest, I didn't expect him to be physically able to continue working as he did. It is in fact rather impressive. Nizu admitted. It also means that the fallout was worse than what was expected. Although given Midoriya's sheer willpower, I doubt he'll let this kill him. That being said, DC is on top of the situation and Midoriya is receiving the best healthcare he can get. When he recovers, we should talk to him about 1A assisting him. At this point, I don't think he can refuse. And if he tries, we'll send in Uraraka to convince him otherwise, Aizawa added. The teachers muttered agreements except for All Might, who was mostly silent. Yagi, you look like someone shot your dog or gave another valid criticism of America, Aizawa said to All Might, giving him his usual deadpan look. It's just, is this my fault? All Might asked somberly. A lot of things are your fault, you're gonna have to be more specific, Aizawa asked. Young Midoriya overworking himself. I feel like, as his role model, I may have inspired that behavior. All Might was aware that he abused his body. I mean, look at him. He coughed up an alarming amount of blood every day and now it seemed like Izuku was starting to do the same. I mean, yes, but what about it? What do you regret saving all those people? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Don't start with the self-deprecation, Yagi, he copied that from you too. This was mostly the fault of Midoriya himself and the quirkless environment that destroyed his sense of self-worth. I suppose, I just feel like I could have said something to him. All Might sighed. It's probably a good thing you didn't, Niza said. After all, your words wouldn't have mattered much if you still went around being a massive hypocrite. You know better than anyone, actions speak louder than words. It was now that Yami fully understood why DC was afraid of his quirk. Yami's opinion on his quirk hasn't changed much throughout his life, despite the massive changes in his life over time. At first, it was just a thing he had. A tool he was born with to help him survive. Like his arms and legs. Back when he lived in the wild, he didn't really have much time to think about it. Occasionally when he had eaten well and was near a river and gazed upon his own reflection, he would wonder why he was the only one in the forest that looked the way he did. That could do the things that he could, and he'd wonder if he would ever meet something else like him. And then he did. When he saw Izuku and all the other children, he saw not only beings like himself, but beings who felt things other than negativity. He saw love and happiness. This of course led him to his new life. As another kid in the orphanage, Yami still viewed his quirk as but another tool, one that he would now barely use. He no longer needed to fight for survival, so why would he need to create more grim? At first, when he got here, he just wanted to lay back and relax, meaning he only really needed his grim to carry him around. It did kind of freak him out a bit when he realized just how much of a power gap there was between him and the other kids. Back in the wild, he was the apex predator, the one on top. But here, not so much. Many of the kids could easily tear through his grim and kill him if they wanted to. However, as time went on, he got more and more comfortable as the knowledge that they wouldn't do that sunk in. But then Izuku asked him to create some more grim, to help him around the house and to act as security. And who was he to refuse the man who had given him everything? So he did. By watching Izuku work with these grim, he began to realize that he could use his quirk to help Izuku out more. By learning about the world around him, he could create new grim that could help Izuku out in new and different ways. So he started doing just that. This caught the attention of the other children, mainly Kiba, who further led him into the rabbit hole of grim making. Still, it was limited. And despite his grim being useful, most of them weren't overly powerful. Sanson, Kiba, Shiruku, and many of the other children could still rip through them in seconds, and it made Yami wonder why he was classified as an OPC and why the world apparently feared him. Not that it bothered him. Most of the kids weren't super resentful of their status as OPC. Except for Fu, whose negative emotions flared up a very tiny bit whenever it was brought up, and Kyoku, who was oh so full of hate. It was just confusing to him that he was given the same classification as his powerful siblings. And then the UA trip happened. Or rather, that's when his trip around the city happened. Yami had only been outside the house once to go to the amusement park. And it was surprising to see just how many people there were, but overall it was a place of fun and joy, so he didn't get a good understanding of how much more powerful he could become when he was around large numbers of people. But his drive around the city opened his eyes. In just a few hours he had gained more negative energy than he had ever had in his life. Much more. To put it into perspective, if all the negative energy he had ever gathered was a pond, then the amount he got from that trip was the sea. That was when Yami understood he was so much more powerful than he thought. He could create entire armies, make mighty beasts that could destroy forests and towns, and even give his siblings a hard time. Except for Sansan. She was still far too powerful. After that, he kinda understood why DOC feared him. But once Izuku collapsed, he got a real good understanding as to why the world did and should fear him. When Yami was born, he didn't have any concepts of emotions or feelings. So he had to learn about them from his quirk. He realized that the dark energy he absorbed off of animals was negative feelings because they'd come off of the animals more when he hunted them and when they were dying. So it's not like it was new information that his quirk was powered by people's bad feelings. But he never truly understood what that meant until now. Once Izuku fell, the negativity in the house exploded. Going back to the bodies of water comparison, if the normal amount of negativity he absorbed was a pond, then now it was like a lake. Still nowhere near as much as he got from his trip to the city, but still significantly more than usual. Now he had a good understanding of what it was that powered his quirk. Calling it negative energy and bad feelings seemed to downplay it. In truth, his quirk was powered by suffering. All the suffering his siblings were going through right now was feeding him, making him more powerful. It was messed up. It felt wrong. It made him understand people's fears about him. Because not only was he strong enough to cause mass suffering, he would benefit from it. Knock knock. As Yami was musing on his bed, there was a sudden knocking on his door. Just by glancing at the door, he knew who it was. After all, there was only one person who wasn't bursting with negativity right now. "Come in, Fu," Yami said, just loud enough for it to be heard on the other side of the door. Fu entered the room. His expression was his normal blank one, but he could see that there were more negative emotions in him than normal. But notably less than yesterday. Maybe that meant good news? Turns out, yes. Dad's going to be okay. Fu blurted out, wanting to get that across as quickly as possible. The hospital called the pussycats and they said he'll live. He overworked himself and that caused his body to weaken. And it also weakened his immune system, which is how he got so sick. He'll be asleep for a few days and he'll be very weak and sick for a while, but he should make a full recovery. There was about a minute of silence after that. Until Yami responded. He overworked himself, Yami repeated dejectedly. So I failed. No, Fu said firmly. If it weren't for your Grim, then it would have been a lot harder for him and he may have worked himself to death. Your Grim helped Dad a lot, he just took on too much work. Work that could only be done by people. You did the best you could. But it wasn't enough. Yami countered with a light growl of frustration. He suffered. And I could do nothing. Fu was silent for a moment, but then eventually spoke. There really was nothing we could have done. Dad wouldn't listen no matter what we did. He loved us too much to trust anyone else to take care of us. Maybe this needed to happen. Yami gave him a weird look. Fu shrugged. If Dad wouldn't listen to us and hire some help, maybe he will now after all this. Dad is stubborn, not dumb. Yami thought about that. As Fu said, it was clear Izuku needed to hire human help. And it made sense that after almost dying and worrying all his kids half to death, that he wouldn't want to repeat this. So maybe something good could come out of this. Anyway, the pussycats keep talking about how useful your Grim are, and I've seen them do things that would have been either impossible or really hard for Izuku. Like lifting heavy things, feeding Kai, and other things. Don't blame yourself for this. Fu told him before turning around to leave. As Fu was leaving, Yami asked him a question. Is my quirk evil? The Grim child asked. Fu froze for a second before looking back at Yami. You've heard what we told Eri, right? Eri's quirk doesn't need people to be in pain, Yami argued. Ah, I see. Fu understood where this came from now. You don't like the fact that you're getting stronger from everyone's suffering. Yami nodded. Fu paused for a moment to consider his response. A quirk is only evil if you use it to be evil. Your quirk doesn't make people suffer. It takes their suffering and uses it to make Grim. If you use your Grim to help people, then you're just taking something bad and making something good out of it. Yami's eyes widened. Something good. Right, Fu confirmed. You've been a big help to everyone in the house. So Dash. Fu did a thankful bow to him. Thank you for everything, little brother. And please continue to help us in the future. There was another moment of silence before Yami started nodding frantically. Yes. Fu's lip twitched upward in what was almost a smile. I'm glad. And with that, Fu turned to leave. But Kyosei had other plans. One of Kyosei's tendrils popped out of Fu and grabbed Yami, bringing him towards Fu. What? Yami was shocked and tried to struggle out of the tendril's grasp. Oh. Fu got the message Kyosei was sending. Kyosei wants us to hug. Yami didn't look pleased that Kyosei's method of asking for a hug was to grab him with a big slimy tentacle, but he didn't seem like he was going to refuse either. Kyosei plopped Yami down right in front of Fu and the two awkwardly embraced. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Fuku didn't sign up for this. She only wanted to go outside to cook some food for everyone and support her friends. That was all. But then they started asking her things. To be specific, after the pussycats got the call from the hospital, they asked the children that weren't freaking out to tell everyone else about it, leaving it up to them as they were less familiar with everyone. And Fuku was somehow considered one of the children not freaking out. So now she had to tell Kiba about the news. Something she really didn't want to do. It's not that she didn't like Kiba. No, it was actually the opposite. Despite never meeting her in person, Fuku had gotten to know Kiba through her streams and over time came to admire her for her sheer confidence. Kiba was a person living her best life without fear of anything, whereas Fuku was a person who was barely living, trapped in her room by illogical fears and paranoia. She was Fuku's complete opposite, and given what Fuku thought of herself, how could she not admire her? With all that in mind, approaching her was terrifying. Not just because of her sheer speed and strength, but because of who she was. She was Kiba, Queen of Eternal Darkness, who commanded almost 1 million followers. The future #1 hero who could destroy buildings with her bare hands. And she was Fuku, a coward who stayed in her room and did almost nothing and didn't know what she would do in the future at all. She might as well be an ant in comparison to her. On top of that, Kiba was in a terrible mood right now. Who knew what she would do to an ant that forgot her place and tried to speak to her? She could get beheaded. But still, what was she supposed to do? Refuse. She knows what happens when you anger the adults. And these people weren't Izuku, she doubted they would be as nice. So here she was, standing in front of Kiba's door, her legs shaking. She didn't have Eri for Fuku with her. She had already told them about the good news, and naturally the two of them cried tears of joy. They were probably still crying now. How could she interrupt their moment by selfishly asking them to help her? That would be cruel of her, and it may make them not want to be her friends anymore. And of course, Mu was nowhere to be found. Who knows, maybe he was next to her the whole time. She wasn't sure if that was comforting or creepy. Regardless, she had a task to do and she needed to find the strength to do it. Okay, Fuku. Think. Maybe I could just say it from outside the door. Yeah. I don't even have to enter the room. Just yell it out from behind her door. Fuku took a deep breath, clenched her fist, and got ready to yell. La Lady Kiba. I have good news. Fuku shouted at the door. Izuku is going to be okay. The hospital called and said he was going to be okay. So. Fuku waited for Kiba to respond. But she never did. After about 2 minutes of silence, Fuku got the impression that maybe Kiba hadn't heard her. Lady Kiba. Did you hear me? Fuku asked. Still no response. That wasn't a good sign. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Can she not hear me? Is she not there? Fu said that Kiba has been in her room the entire time. Maybe she's asleep. Fuku wondered. Should I leave? But this is important. If I don't tell her Izuku is okay and leave her worrying for who knows how long, then she'll definitely be mad at me. What do I do? After a bit of panicking, Fuku decided the best course of action was to go inside and tell her face to face, or rather face to hoodie. So using her shaking hand, she opened Kiba's door and prepared to face Kiba, the Queen of Eternal Darkness. So she entered. And it was not what she expected at all. It was dark inside, the only light coming from the TV screen. From what she could see, the room was covered in scratches and holes, and many of the decorations were damaged in some way. And in the center of the room was Kiba herself, sitting on the floor, just staring at the TV with her legs crossed. Her hair was a mess. Never before had Fuku seen her silver locks look so unkempt. It was like she spent the last few days in bed. And the fact that she was in her wrinkly pajamas as if they were the only things she'd worn for a while supported this. It was an eerie sight and also a sad one. Fuku carefully came into the room, almost tiptoeing. Hello, Lady Kiba? Fuku called out to her from the other side of the room. Kiba didn't respond. Fuku stepped forward, bringing herself closer and closer, until she was right next to Fuku, and was able to see her face. Fuku's eyes were glazed over and bloodshot, and bags marred her usually perfect face. It looked like she had spent her nights crying rather than sleeping. Lady Kiba? Fuku called out, now right next to her. Ha! Kiba suddenly became alert, ripping her focus away from the TV and onto Fuku. Fukunoko? What are you doing here? Well, I needed to tell you something. Fuku explained, stuttering with fear and trepidation. I never thought I would be you, coming to see me, Kiba admitted. Her tone was about as sad as she looked. She didn't sound loud and cocky as she normally did. Right now she sounded quiet and fearful. It must be important if you came out of your room. Well, I've been doing that a lot after Izuku, you know. Fuku didn't want to say what happened out loud, lest she anger the tiny queen. Nevertheless, Kiba's eyes darkened. Yeah, I know. Suddenly, Kiba's eyes widened and a bit of life came back into them. Wait, is this about Daddy? Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay. Kiba was begging. Fuku would now. She had spent so much of her life begging. Begging for love from her parents. Begging for the pain to stop. Begging to be good. Begging for anyone to save her. In front of her wasn't the strong and powerful Lady Kiba. The Kiba in front of her right now was just like Arian K. A little girl begging for her father to be safe. It was heartbreaking to see. He's okay. He's going to be okay. Fuku said strongly. The hospital called and they said that he's gonna be sick for a while, but he'll make a full recovery. So don't worry. Kiba stared at her wide-eyed for a moment before her eyes shut as tears started to pour out. And then she snagged Fuku into a tight embrace. A bit too tight. Ella Lady Kiba. Please, you're crushing me. It took all of Fuku's restraint to keep her quirk from activating out of fear. Sorry. Kiba remembered her strength and held back a bit. Thank you. Kiba continued to sob while keeping Fuku in her embrace, her tight, inescapable embrace. Teether there, Lady Kiba. Fuku fearfully reassured her, awkwardly patting her back to try and soothe her so she could release Fuku from her iron grip. It's all gonna be okay. I was so worried. Kiba started sobbing into Fuku's shoulder. Why? Unfortunately for Fuku, Kiba didn't plan on letting her go anytime soon. Izuku couldn't wait to go home. When he had woken up in the hospital, he was in a panic. What had happened to him? What had happened to the kids? He had panicked so much that the doctors had to knock him out just to keep him from hurting himself further. Once he had calmed down and been given a little time to recover, he heard from the doctors what had happened to him. He had overworked himself, which caused a myriad of health problems, including extreme exhaustion. And what's worse is that the strain he put on his body had weakened his immune system, meaning he was quite sick. Which made sense because Izuku felt like crap. He could barely move, he felt like he was going to vomit at any moment, pain would randomly course through his body from time to time, he was coughing a lot, fortunately no more blood came out, and he had nasty headaches. In other words, he had abused his body and so now it was abusing him. But none of that mattered at the time because none of the doctors could tell him what was happening with his children. Fortunately, DUC showed up and explained everything. The kids had called him an ambulance and after that they called the Pussycats as he requested and they came as quickly as they could. Izuku made a mental note to get them a nice gift for their troubles. DUC said that they would transfer him back to the house soon with all the hospital equipment he would need and some doctors would come from the house to check up on him and do whatever they would need to do to make sure Izuku recovered. After that his mother visited. They had had a tearful reunion which was pretty much the only way to describe it as the two basically spent the entire time crying. After her, he expected maybe Achiko to visit, but that was about it. What he had not expected was for his mother, Nizu, All Might, Skinny Form, Achiko, Nami, and Mandalay to visit him, all at once. Oh, hey guys? Izuku coughed, his hoarse voice filled with shock at seeing all these people crowded around him. Midoriya, this is an intervention, Nizu told him. You can't do this job on your own, sweetheart, Inko told him, looking so concerned and worried that it broke Izuku's heart to even look at her. Look at what you've done to yourself, Izuku, you can't do this again. The kids were completely heartbroken when this happened. Mandalay looked so sad. And guilt stabbed into Izuku because he knew why. She was over there with the kids watching them in their depressed and heartbroken states. And they were all hurting because of him. Young Midoriya, I understand that maybe I'm not the best person to be saying this, but it needs to be said. You can't do everything alone. Everyone needs a support system. All Might, for a reason Izuku couldn't comprehend, looked guilty. Like he was personally responsible for what happened to Izuku. And that made Izuku feel guilty in return. And we've been telling you this for months. Achiko didn't yell, but you could still clearly hear the frustration in her voice, which was also made evident by her expression. Listen to M-Kid. Think about how badly it would affect the kids if you died. Nami told him. It was pretty obvious that she was just here to make sure Izuku didn't get himself in this situation again. Because that would be really bad for her. I'm sorry. Izuku teared up. It was now that the weight of his failure was really pressing down on him. He'd hurt his kids by not hiring help. He'd been hurting his kids because they had to watch someone they cared for fall apart. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I failed. He could hear his old childhood tormentors now. Failure. Can't do anything. Useless deku. Useless deku. Useless deku. Mr. Midoriya. Ha! Izuku was shaken out of his traumatic flashback by the feeling of something soft touching his arm. Niza took the time to get a stool and stood on it so that way he could put his paw on Izuku's arm. Mr. Midoriya. We understand why you did what you did. People treated you harshly for most of your life. So then in turn to ask you to trust them with your children who have also been treated poorly by the people around them is asking quite a lot. It's scary. But it's necessary. Young Midoriya, it's not that you failed. You simply made a mistake. All Might told him gently. Which is fine. Everyone makes mistakes. What's important is that we learn from them, not wallow in them. Dude, it's not you. No one without some sort of infinite stamina quirk could do what you were trying to do and not collapse. Nami told him. Heck, I don't think anyone without a stamina quirk could do what you were doing for half as long. Seriously dude, how the fuck did you do all that work for so long? Pixie Bob asked the same thing, Mandalay added. They had only been doing some of Izuku's work, split among 4 people and with some of the kids helping, and the blonde member of the Pussycats' first question was how in the actual hell Izuku could do everything he did and not die. Before making some very inappropriate comments about Izuku's bedroom durability in his more mature years. What we're trying to say is, don't despair. You're not dead, your children will eventually return to their happier selves. Let us focus on the positives and do what we need to do to improve. Nizu explained to him. Izuku took a second to think. They were right. He was still alive. He was still in charge of these kids. Just sitting here crying about what he did wrong won't fix it. You're right. He wanted to say get back to work, but the pain, soreness, and overall numbness of his body reminded him that that would only result in making the situation worse. As much as he hated it, he needed to take some time to recover. But he also needed to help the kids now more than ever. And what about his work for the QRD? Seeing Izuku's internal conflict and confusion, Niza decided now was the time to strike. Mr. Midoriya, I would like to ask your permission for something, Niza told him, earning a confused look from Izuku. I would like permission for Class 1A with the exception of Bakugo Katsuki to take up residency in your home for the next 3 weeks and work for you. Izuku's eyes widened and in the back Achiko had the same exposition, not being in on the plan. Wait. Izuku coughed. What do you mean? I don't want to force anyone to work for me. And wouldn't that mean they'd have to stop their hero training for 3 weeks? I can't do that to them. Oh, don't worry about that, Mr. Midoriya. Should you let them use your training room, they can still make significant progress with their quirks and they will still receive advice and instructions for our staff via the school website. Nizu explained. Still, asking them to juggle schoolwork and work around the house is asking a lot. Izuku retorted. Do remember that these are a total of 19 children. I think they can distribute the work to a very reasonable level. Niza had prepared for Izuku to try and find reasons to refuse his offer. There was no way Izuku could reasonably say no here. And the others around him would make sure he stayed reasonable. And you don't have to worry about forcing them to work for you. I think many of the students will in fact be eager to help you. Yeah. Achiko ran forward and gave Izuku a determined glare. Everyone adored those kids. And so many of them are even fans of Kiba's channel. I've known them for months and I know all of them wouldn't miss a chance to help you guys out. So please, let us help you. Izuku didn't feel right about this, but maybe that was part of his problem. Alright. Okay everyone, I have something important to tell you all, Eraserhead said to his class. Do you all remember Midoriya Izuku? Most of his class nodded, although the girls, who already knew what happened to Izuku, just got upset. Except for Achiko, who had a look of fierce determination ever since Izuku agreed to Class 1A helping him. She was gonna help her friend if it was the last thing she did. Well, he collapsed. Aizawa bluntly stated. This yielded the expected reactions from the expected people. The guys just looked shocked and upset about this development. While the girls remained the same, although they winced a bit and a few of them looked towards Achiko. Bakugo's reaction, however, was interesting. He looked shocked for the first few seconds like everyone else, before looking concerned for approximately half a second, before shifting into his typical angry, I don't care look. The class broke out into just noise, with so many of the students asking questions and saying things. Fortunately, they were silenced by the one student Aizawa was glad was loud. Everyone, quiet down. Ida shouted while doing his standard air chop. We must get our concerns across in an orderly fashion. After a couple minutes everyone quieted down and Aizawa spoke before anyone else could. Midoriya has been taken to the hospital and will make a full recovery. In fact, he's being transferred back home today. However, it will take him a lot of time before he can get back to work. Aizawa explained. So he can't go through the process of hiring employees at the moment, so that's where you all come in. All of you except Bakugo will be living at the Midoriya home and working under him for the next 3 weeks. What? Shouted basically everyone except Bakugo and Achiko. Once again the classroom erupted into pure noise. But this time Aizawa took it upon himself to shut everyone up. Quiet. Aizawa activated his quirk, giving him intimidating red eyes and floating hair. And so everyone promptly closed their mouths and stopped talking. However, one student actually had the guts to raise his hand. Shoto Todoroki. Aizawa sighed and deactivated his quirk. Yes, Todoroki? Why are we being sent in to do this? Shoto asked. Out of everyone he'd reacted the least to the news of Izuku's collapse. He was still a bit shocked when he heard the news and deep down he was a bit concerned for the children under the green boy's care, but that didn't mean he wanted to go all the way there and take care of the kids himself. We're hero students, not babysitters. What, and heroes don't help people in need? Achiko glared at Todoroki. Those kids need our help and dash. Uraraka, Aizawa said her name sharply, stopping her in her tracks before he moved on to Shoto. The reason why you are all being sent in to do this is because the list of people Midoriya trusts is small. And most of them are too busy to try this kind of thing. Mrs. Midoriya is available, but she wouldn't be able to do all that work by herself. Fortunately, that list of people includes Uraraka, and she was able to convince him to allow you all to work there. You guys are pretty much the only option. And it might do you all some good to be reminded of why your jobs are important. Who you're working to protect and why. Because it's incredibly easy for pros to lose track of that. That last sentence actually got Shoto thinking about his father. Was that what happened? He lost track of what it meant to be a hero? That he was supposed to protect? That actually made some sense. And then combined with what Uraraka had said, maybe he should just shut up for now. Also, despite our objections that such things were unnecessary, Midoriya has insisted that you will all be paid handsomely for your time there. Aizawa gave a resigned sigh. Let's just say at least I don't need to plan around any of you getting a part-time job in the future. Who yes? Cheered about half the class. Bless you Midoriya. May nothing bad ever happen to you again. Mineta cried. Bakugo, how could you bully such a kind and innocent soul? Mina shouted. Eat shit Pinky. Bakugo replied. Which to be fair, you will be risking your lives with all these extremely dangerous children around, Aizawa said to kill their enthusiasm. Which worked pretty effectively. Taking the wind right out of their sails. Oh come on, they're not that dangerous. Achiko tried to reassure them. Yes, they are, Aizawa said, receiving a betrayed glare from Uraraka. As much as I don't approve of DC and the general public treating them like monsters. They're listed as OPCs for a reason. And while it is important that you treat them like children, you also have to keep in mind that they can accidentally kill you. Which brings me to this. Eraserhead pulled out a remote and pressed a button. Suddenly from behind him a TV screen slid out of the ceiling and the tired hero stepped aside so everyone could see it. I will be explaining briefly about the quirks of kids you'll be taking care of, Aizawa told them. So pay attention, it's important if you don't want to die. Everyone was intensely focused, even Bakugo. If only because he was curious. Firstly, we have the one that started it all. Eri Midoriya. Aizawa pressed a button and the screen turned on, showing an image of Eri. Ah! Went most of the girls as well as Kirishima and Kaminari. So this is Eri. The one whose backstory must not be known. Mina said before gasping. Are we gonna hear her dash? No. Aizawa cut her off immediately. Her story is so fucking classified that I don't know it. Heck, even she isn't allowed to fully remember her own past. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about her quirk, rewind. The screen then showed a short video of Eri rewinding an already eaten apple back into an uneaten apple. It allows her to rewind any organic substance back to a previous state, whether it's back to a previous state of their lives or even setting them back in evolution. Meaning she can literally turn you into a monkey. Aizawa said. But that is probably one of the better case scenarios. You see, Eri has a hard time controlling her quirk, meaning that more likely than not, when her quirk is active, this happens. The screen then showed a video of Eri making an apple vanish into thin air. Wait, what did she just do? Kaminari asked, confused on how rewinding something made it vanish. Did she rewind it back to a seed? Momo guessed. Close, she rewinded to before it existed, Aizawa said bluntly. She can do this to any living thing, including people. Wait, so if you touch her you die? Mineta shouted out in fear. You just instantly die. Basically yes, Aizawa said, keeping his blunt tone. Normally I would just tell you to stay away from her when her horn starts glowing, however, you all will also be responsible for helping her train and control her quirk. So you'll have to get close to her while it's on at some point. There were a few audible gulps among the class, and even Uraraka looked just a little bit nervous. Fortunately, you will all be provided with a tranquilizer gun, which you should use if she loses control of her quirk, Aizawa explained. Wait, you want us to just shoot a kid? Mina shouted in slight outrage. I mean, I know it's a tranq gun, but isn't that a bit extreme? There were a few mutterings of agreement with Mina's statement across the class. Unfortunately, it is very much necessary. Just leaving her quirk active while it's out of control is extremely dangerous. Because as I said, if anyone touches her, they're dead instantly. Aizawa reiterated. That seemed to shut down the objections, although everyone still looked a bit comfortable. Moving on. Next, we have Kei Midoriya. Aizawa said as the screen showed Kei. Pretty simple. Her quirk turns anyone who sees her eyes to stone for 24 hours. She has a visor to prevent this. If her visor is removed or damaged, replace it without looking into her eyes. And if someone does get turned into a statue, make sure not to break them. Zero raised his hand. Yes. Aizawa sighed. If you get turned to stone and let's say your arm falls off, and then you glue it back together, will you still have that arm? Zero asked. Yes, but it has to be put back perfectly. If even a small pebble is left off, it can have drastic consequences. Aizawa explained. So you better off just not risking it. Any more questions? Mineta raised his hand. You weren't supposed to have any more questions. Aizawa's eyebrow twitched. Yes, Mineta. What could you possibly have to ask? Are the snakes venomous? The grape boy asked. Okay, that's a fair question. Aizawa thought. No. He saw some of the students breathe a sigh of relief. All right, moving on. Aizawa had a lot of kids to go through and he wanted to do it as fast as possible. Fu Midoriya and Kyosei Midoriya. You should already be familiar with them, right? The class nodded. All right, just make sure to feed them absurd amounts of meat. And they'll be fine. Aizawa squinted. And also don't give them chocolate. It causes them to freak out, go berserk, and temporarily die. Never thought I'd hear the phrase, temporarily die. Shinso chuckled at the absurdity of the two words being put together. Next, Kiba Midoriya. You should be familiar with her as well. Aizawa brought up an image of Kiba. Especially if you dash. Hail the queen. Shouted out Kirishima, Mina, Toru, and Kaminari. Watch her YouTube channel. Aizawa wanted to go to sleep so badly right now. Anyway, she needs human blood to live, so just make sure to feed her blood. And beware of her absurd strength. Next, the screen changed to a picture of Sansan. Alright, Sansan Midoriya, you already know her quirk and why it's dangerous. The only thing I need to tell you is the special neutralizing procedure. Aizawa said. There are special chemicals that, when introduced into her body, rendering her acid harmless. It also changes the color of her body to blue. This has to be done every 24 hours. Mina raised her hand. No, Mina, I don't know what it would do to you. No, I don't think you should try it and find out. Aizawa saw that question coming a mile away. And just as he thought, Mina took her hand back down. Okay, next is Kyoku Midoriya. Aizawa pressed the button to show Kyoku on screen. Her quirk allows her to see into the memories of others and change them as she pleases, so long as she's touching their heads. Although if a victim of her quirk is met with a concrete contradiction to those false memories, their real memories will return. While this quirk is not actively dangerous, its potential uses are rather intimidating, and the girl herself has absolutely no qualms about using her quirk frequently and freely, especially on people she doesn't like. Which includes everyone not part of her family who is also not Uraraka. So while we're there, we have to worry about some kid lurking around trying to make us think we're a completely different person. Kaminari asked. She's not that bad. Achiko tried to tell everyone. She's a bit rough around the edges, but she's an okay kid. And if you really want to get her to trust you, then just talk crap about Bakugo. Worked for me. Screw you, round face. Bakugo seethed. I exaggerated a bit, Aizawa admitted. Midoriya will keep her from doing anything too bold for the most part, and so long as she can't touch your head, she can't use her quirk. Man, guess I'll have to lock my door at night to keep the 6-year-old out. Toru giggled a bit at how stupid that sounded. Next, we have Shiruku Midoriya. Aizawa showed an image of Shiruku. Her quirk, as you can see, gives her the abilities and attributes of a spider. giving her super strength, speed, durability, the ability to shoot webs, climb walls, and she also can control other spiders around her. However, since spiders are cannibals, the only things she can eat are spiders and human flesh. No one could see it that well, but Toru was getting the heebie-jeebies. She had seen Shiruku on Kiba's stream, and while she knew she was a perfectly nice girl, Toru just didn't like spiders. They creeped her out. She would get over it because, well, she'd have to, seeing as she would be working with her now, and it would be extremely uncool to let something like this influence her opinion of a person, let alone a kid. But it wasn't going to be pleasant. Just keep her fed and everything should be fine. Next, the screen changed to an image of Yami. This is Yami Midoriya. You should already be familiar with him and his quirk. Honestly, you don't actually need to do anything to keep his quirk in check. In fact, he's actually extremely helpful. His grim act is both security and housekeeper. So if you need any help you can just use them. That being said, he could probably use a bit more emotional support. Lots of hugs. Got it? Mina nodded. It's gonna be weird to walk up to a demon ape and say, hey, can you carry this for me? Thanks. Zero laughed a bit. Alright, next is Fukunoko Midoriya. The screen showed a photo of Fuku. Ah, that poor girl looks so scared. Mina cooed. Well, that's what she normally looks like, at least that's what I'm told, Aizawa said. Anyway, her quirk is called fear gas. It allows her to release a gas that when inhaled causes the victim to hallucinate their greatest fears while also inhibiting logical brain functions, meaning you can't just get through it by telling yourself it's not real. It will make you think it's real. One of the people who inhaled it and was still able to speak full sentences afterward described it as being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake from. That got some squeamish looks of horror on the students' faces. Also, if she gets overly panicked, she will accidentally release a burst of this gas. Oh, and she gets very easily spooked. Very easily. Aizawa told them, only adding to the feeling of unease. However, due to her natural fear of pretty much everything, she stays in her room almost all the time, which is built to handle her quirk. And there are gas masks to make sure that you don't inhale any of the gas. Lastly, the gas disperses rather quickly and is pretty hard to miss. So unless you're being an idiot, you shouldn't inhale it. Sighs of relief rang out amongst the class. Okay, next is Kai Midoriya. Aizawa showed an image of Kai and he could practically hear Bakugo's blood pressure rise. Oh hey, it's the kid that sat on Bakugo. Kaminari pointed out with a snicker. That was hilarious. You wanna fight, Sparkplug? I'll fucking kill you. Bakugo nearly jumped out of his seat and lunged at Kaminari. The fucking kid said that he was Deka's son. I was fucking in shock. That's fair, but it was pretty funny though. Mina giggled. This kid is actually very well behaved and causes less property damage than you'd expect, Aizawa revealed. Really, you just have to accommodate for this massive size. Which isn't an easy task, but other than that, this kid won't give you much trouble. That being said, even with as careful as he is, it's not impossible for him to sit on you, so be on your toes. Grrrr. Bakugo growled at the obvious jab at him. Next is Otoko Midoriya. When Aizawa showed the picture, he saw Shoji give the boy a look of pity. When touching him, his quirk sets anyone feeling a significant amount of fear on fire. Man, I've always wondered, why do quirks mess with people's appearances for no reason like this? Kaminari wondered out loud. Like, why does Tokoyami have a bird head? Why does Koda's quirk make him look like that? And why does Mina's acid-shooting quirk make her look like a hot alien? Jiro turned to Mina and raised her earjack, silently asking, you want me to stab him? Mina shook her head and silently responded with nah. That was more of a compliment than a perv moment. Jiro shrugged and brought her jack back down. Well, to be fair, Kaminari, I can actually see how his appearance coordinates with his quirk, Momo responded. His appearance seems to be meant to inspire fear, hence activating his quirk. Which is unfortunate. If he doesn't want to be a hero with his quirk, then it's only a detriment, making him frighten the people around him and setting fire to others by accident. Shoji deeply sympathized with this kid. Firstly, he looked even less human than him, and secondly, while his quirk did cause some people to fear or despise him, at least he never had to worry about it spontaneously setting people on fire. He's pretty gentle, so none of you should have any real reason to be afraid of him, Eraserhead noted. And if you are, get over it. Moving on. Next on the screen was nothing. Many of the students looked at the screen confused, wondering why nothing was on screen. Okay, next is Mu Midoriya, and we don't have any pictures of him. Aizawa massages his temple. The reason being is that he is the most elusive of all the children. His quirk allows him to enter some weird alternate dimension thing that lets him move around like a ghost. No one can see or hear him, and he can go through people and objects. This combined with his shy personality basically means that taking a picture of him is impossible. Honestly, you probably won't see him much if at all. Oh, is that a challenge? Mina's face broke out into a dangerous grin. I'm gonna friend the hell out of that kid. Me too. One goes to another. Toru joked. Oh, also one more thing, anything besides himself that goes into his dimension thing will almost immediately start to disintegrate, Aizawa added. You should have started with that, shouted a good chunk of the class in unison. Aizawa shrugged. Anyway, moving on. Now we have Yonda Midoriya. She is deaf, however instead of hearing voices she can hear your thoughts, and instead of speaking normally her voice is telepathic. So instead of being a possible threat to our health, she is a constant threat to our privacy. Todoroki summarized. We just have to be careful about what we think around her, Kaminari suggested. Well, that won't be a problem for you. All she's gonna hear from your head is dead silence. Jiro teased. As Kaminari said, watch your thoughts and you'll be fine, Aizawa confirmed. Getting close to the end. Netsu Midoriya. You all should remember him. You endeavor but small, Mina said. I wouldn't make that comparison, Todoroki added. Yeah, he has powerful, uncontrollable flames. Fire is dangerous. Beware of fire. Aizawa looked at the clock. Clearly going faster so he could just get this done with. Anyway, moving on. Juken and Nara. These two are kids with very powerful transformation quirks. They can both transform into 10 unique forms that all have their own uses. Nara isn't really a problem, but her brother might transform into a murderous ghost for 10 minutes if he gets too freaked out, so be careful. Now that's all the kids, so does anyone have any questions? Pretty much everyone raised their hands. Great. Well, hopefully those questions are answered in these. Aizawa leaned down and took out a stack of 19 booklets. These should have all the details you need. And if they don't, then just figure it out. Anyway, you can spend the rest of class doing self-study. I spent all night putting together these freaking books, so I'll be on the ground if anyone needs me. But do me a favor and don't need me. And with that, the extremely tired teacher collapsed onto the floor, snuggled into his sleeping bag, and promptly fell asleep. Well, guys. Isn't this great? Achiko said, trying to get people in the helping spirit. It's like a working vacation. A working vacation with the risk of a horrible death. My favorite kind of vacation. Jiro said, looking very much not in the spirit. Achiko gave a soft glare and Jiro shrugged. Listen, I'm all about helping kids. But I'm not thrilled about a babysitting job where the penalty for messing up is death. But we're heroes. We're always risking our lives to help people. How's this any different? Achiko asked the class. Because the villains we fight aren't as dangerous as these kids? Shiro pointed out. I mean, I don't think anyone is against helping your boyfriend. I think we're just a bit unnerved about the high chance of death. Come on guys, they're just cute kids. Mina pointed out. Caretaker has been taking care of them for months, so they can't be that deadly. If Deka's managed to be around them that long and not die, listers will be fine. Stop whining. Bakugo scoffed. I'm not happy about this taking away from our studies, but I'm more than willing to support a noble cause, Momo added with a sigh. To be fair, if we are getting paid as much as Aizawa alluded to, then all the time we lose doing this will be made up for with us not having to pick up part-time jobs. Tokoemi pointed out. Exactly. Not all of us are filthy rich like our privileged trio of Yamomo, Prez, and Mr. Cold Shoulder. Kaminari added. Privileged trio. Momo and Ida shouted out in shock and outrage while Todoroki raised an eyebrow. It's not like we have much of a choice on the matter, Karo. Not that I mind. Ajui jumped into the conversation. We should just all take the time to enjoy this experience while trying not to die. Just like how being a hero should be. Exactly. Achiko went up and hugged her froggy friend. Thanks, Tsu. Bakugo rolled his eyes. TCH. I came to get away from stupid Deku and now I can't stop hearing about him. What a fucking joke. Izuka decided to keep his return to the house a surprise. If only because he knew that he would get swarmed when he got home and he really couldn't handle that. The Greenette was currently in a wheelchair, being pushed by his mother at the gates of the house. We're here, Inko said into the gate's intercom, alerting the pussycats to their presence. Understood, welcome home Izuku, Mandalay said, trying to sound as inviting as possible. The gates opened and Inko wheeled her son through them. It was all going peacefully until they got to the front door. And found Kyoko waiting for them. The little girl had heard the gates open and wondered who could be entering their home and why. When she saw her father on the other side of the door, her body moved before her she could think. Daddy! Kyoko jumped at Izuku, landing on his lap and wrapping her arms around his waist. OPH! Izuku felt the girl impact him and broke out into a coughing fit. It's nice to see you too, Kyoku. Ugh. But Daddy's still not feeling too well. Kyoka didn't seem to hear this and continued to hug him, sobbing heavily into his shirt, wetting it with her own tears until a black tendril picked her up and pulled her off him. Okay, that's enough. Fu walked up to them, using Kyosei to keep Kyoku in the air and cover her mouth so she didn't alert the others. Thank you, Fu. Izuka told his first son with a smile. Fu nodded, his face expressionless as always, but if you looked in his eyes you could see just a bit of joy at seeing Izuku again. Glad to see you, Dad. You to Grandma. Inko gave him a warm smile. Fu, I'm happy you've been doing well. And your quirk has changed. No, this is Kyosei. He's another one of your grandkids. Fu said, pointing at the black tendril. He's a baby that lives inside me and eats my organs. Say hi to Grandma Kyosei. Another tendril came out of Fu and waved at Inko. Oh, hello dear. Inko had absolutely no idea how to take that, so she figured that she would just process that later. We should get you upstairs before everyone else finds you here and swarms you, Fu said as more tendrils came out of him, grabbing Izuku from his chair before the boy jumped from the first floor to the next, making the way to the top of the house. MMM. Meanwhile, Kyoku was still struggling in Kyosei's grasp. We'll let you go later. Just wait till we get Dad into bed. Fu told her. After Izuku had gotten situated in his bed, the pussycats, as well as Inko, Nara, Ken, Otoko, and of course Fu and Kyoku, latter of whom was on Izuku's bed with him, hugging his side very tightly. It's good to see you back, Izuku. Nara gave him a polite bow and a kind smile. Things haven't been the same without you. I'll say. Everyone's been freaking out and we've had to do a dozen more chores every day. Ken complained, getting an elbow to the side from his very irritated sister. Ow. What was that for? Izuka sighed and gave the two a very half-hearted smile. Thank you all for your work and helping out after I collapsed. I'm very proud of you all for keeping a cool head and stepping up when you were needed. Actually, Fukunoko also helped out a lot. Fu pointed out. Izuka paused and his eyes went wide. Wait, Fuku, our Fuku? The one that almost never leaves her room. The very same, Nara answered. We were shocked too. It was the first time some of us had seen her and she was going around helping out with chores and comforting Eri and Kei. Izuku was very torn about this information. On one hand, a surge of pride flooded his body. Shy little Fuku got over her fears and for the sake of others she went outside and helped out with the chores when she was needed. That is such a huge step for her. But on the other hand, that must have been so stressful for her. He can't even imagine how scared she was, especially with all the Grimm around. And he was the one who put her in that position. Then again, maybe forcing her out of her comfort zone is what she needed? He'll have to see how this turns out later. Either way, he swallowed his guilt. He couldn't wallow, he had to keep going. I'll have to give her a really special reward. Izuka put on a smile before turning to the pussycats. And thank you all for coming here so quickly. I'm sorry if I disturbed your work. It's fine. We were actually on vacation anyway. Mandalay reassured him. Pixie Bob was about to say something but Ragdoll quickly went over and covered her mouth. Yeah, it's really not a problem. Ragdoll said. With that being said, we do need to get back soon. Do you mind if we leave Koda here? He was really worried about you. Mandalay requested, giving him a bow. I'm sorry if that's too much, Dash. No, it's fine. Izuku coughed into his fist. I mean, I already have so many kids, what's one more? Mandalay giggled. I see. I guess that's one way to look at it. Well, I suppose we'll be on our way. Pussycats. Out. And with that the pussycats waved goodbye as they filed out of the room, closing the door behind them, leaving Izuku with his family. Inko turned to Otoko, Ken, and Nara and smiled at them. By the way, I'm Izuku's mother, Inko. It's so nice to meet you all. Oh, it's nice to meet you too, ma'am. Nara did a stiff bow of politeness. You don't need to be so polite, dear. Inko walked over and patted her on the head. Sweet. I don't really do well with all the stiff formal stuff. I leave that to the stick in the mud. Ken smirked, pointing to his sister before he dodged an attempted punch to the arm from said sister. Nice try, dweeb. Otoko walked up to Inko, staying a good distance away but still close enough so she could see his sign language. Nice to meet you, Grandma. Inko gave him a bright smile and signed back. I'm very happy to meet you too, dear. It's been quite a while since I've used sign language, so please let me know if I say anything wrong. Otoko felt a twinge of relief at the fact that his grandmother could understand him and signed back. No, it's perfect. Inko giggled with joy and signed back. Good, I'm relieved. All right. Izuka sighed, taking a deep breath to prepare himself for what was next. It's time to tell the other kids I'm Dash. Thump, thump, thump. A massive thumping could be heard outside as suddenly a huge eyeball covered the window. Dad, you're back. You're okay, Kai shouted out in his massive voice. Oh dear. Inko and everyone else for that matter realized what was about to happen. Izuku winced as he could already feel the dog pile and he was not ready. Protect Dad. Fu got into a fighting stance, Kyosei covering his body as tentacles sprouted out of his back. Ken and Nara gave each other a nod before turning down to their omnitrixes. In a flash of green and pink, Ken was replaced by 4 arms and Nara was replaced by Articuana. And Otoko just stood there. He wasn't gonna risk setting anyone on fire, so he'd just sit this one out. They heard the sounds of feet banging against the floor, getting closer and closer. They're coming. Ken stood ready in front of Izuku, his arms spread out ready to catch any overeager kids. Smash! Suddenly the door flew across the room as Kiba kicked it off its hinges. The vampire girl ran in, followed by Eri, Kei, Sanson, Shiruku, Yami, Yanda, and Netsu, and when they saw Izuku they froze. Daddy! Kiba looked at her father, shocked for a moment before tears dripped down her face and she shouted, Daddy! This would be the war cry that caused all the kids to go running to try and jump on Izuku. Black net. Fu unleashed Kyosei's tendrils as the black inky appendages spread out, capturing Eri, Kei, Shiruku, Yami, and Yanda, but Netsu and Sanson were free as they moved closer to Izuku. Nara unleashed a freezing blast, covering both Sanson and Netsu. Sanson instantly turned into a solid, completely unable to move, and Netsu was enveloped in a block of ice from the neck down. Meanwhile, Kiba and Shiruku used their strength and quickly broke free of Kyosei's grasp and went back to charging at Izuku, but they were caught midair in Ken's many arms. Hey, settle down, Ken told the 2 girls as they struggled in his grasp. Fortunately, Kiba was far from full power, so he was able to keep her trapped in his grip along with Shiruku. The trapped children whined and complained for a while, except Sanson, who was frozen, until Fu sent out his tendrils to cover everyone's mouths. Everyone quiet down. Fu ordered Kyosei, making him sound much more intimidating. Dad is still not feeling great, so don't just rush at him. Be careful. Also Kiba, Shiruku, Netsu, you all must be very careful. Understood. They all stopped struggling, letting out some nodes, and yes, until they were all eventually let go. Netsu turned up his quirk's power, quickly melting the ice around him and drying his clothes before moving to Sanson to thaw her out. Once that was done, all the kids gathered around Izuku and gently climbed onto his bed and hugged him, some of them crying onto his shirt and Kiba unleashing a number of tears that was worthy of the Midoriya name. Sanson wrapped all around them, trapping them all in the massive group hug/dog pile. There. It's okay. I'm okay. Izuku wrapped his arms around as many of them as he could and patted their heads. Inko tearfully watched this reunion on the side, whipping her eyes with some tissues she kept in her purse. She quickly realized she wasn't the only one as she heard some sobbing near the window and remembered that Kai was still there, unable to join because of his massive size. Feeling bad for the boy, Inko went to the window, opened it up and pet the boy to try and soothe him. This went on for a long time. Once the tearful reunion had ended, the kids lined up in front of Izuku's bed because he had an announcement for them. Alright, so, do you guys remember that exercise at UA? Izuku asked the kids, receiving nods all around from everyone but Ken and Nara. Wait, what happened with UA? Nara asked, surprised by the sudden bringing up of the most famous hero school in the country. Oh right, you weren't here when that happened. Izuku realized. So, U.A basically does charity work with us and invited me and any of the kids who were interested in becoming heroes in the future to help Class 1A in a combat exercise. Wait, you got to go to UA? Like, the UA the #1 hero school in the world? Nara asked in slight amazement and disbelief. And we missed it. Ken whined. Ugh, if only we got here sooner. It was really fun. The students were all real cool. Netsu told them. Awan nice. Sanson added. Well, I'm glad you think so. Izuku tensed a bit as he looked at Kyoku. He wasn't sure exactly how they would take this, but he hoped it would go over well. Because I was talking with Nizu and Achiko. Who's Achiko? Ken asked. He knew Nizu. Anyone who wanted to be a hero knew of the famous principle of UA, but he'd never heard of anyone named Achiko. Achiko Uraraka is a hero student at UA. She's Dad's best friend, Fu answered. And future girlfriend. Shiruku added. No, she's not. Izuku's face turned red and he broke into another coughing fit as his mother giggled in the corner. Anyway, as I was saying, we were talking and we've come to the conclusion that since I can't work in my currency state, Achiko and the rest of Class 1A will come here and act as temporary workers until I'm well enough to hire permanent workers. And I will be actually hiring people this time. I promise. The general reaction to this was positive. Most of the kids were excited to hear that someone would be helping Izuku out and voiced these thoughts very loudly. Of course, the big exception to this was Kyoku, who looked very displeased about this but thankfully didn't object or voice her displeasure. But there was one reaction that was just off. Kiba. She just didn't seem to react much. She looked a bit happy at the news, but she seemed distracted by something. In fact, Kiba in general had been off this entire time. First off, she looked so much more unkempt since the last time he saw her. Messy hair, wrinkled, well-worn clothes, and she wasn't putting up the Queen of Eternal Darkness act she usually put up. And as was stated earlier, she just seemed distracted after her burst of emotion from earlier. She just kept looking at his office? For some reason. Izuku didn't know what was up with that, but now that he was looking at his office door, he noticed something else. Koda. He was ashamed to admit that with all the chaos that had just gone on, he didn't notice that Koda was missing. But here he was, peeking from the other side of the door frame, glaring at him. He seemed mad about something and Izuku could probably guess what he was mad about. However, he would have to deal with all these things on their own, later. Alright, everyone, I need you all to make sure you're on your best behavior. They'll be here for a few weeks, so don't be afraid to get to know them, Izuku instructed. Remember, these are Achiko's friends, so they're to be trusted. Then Fu raised his hand. Yes, Fu. Izuku wondered what his question could be. If all of 1A is coming here, does that mean Bakugo will also be coming? Fu asked. Izuku should have seen that coming. Suddenly the mood drastically shifted. The more Gentile children looked worried and even slightly fearful of the notion that the person who made Izuku's life hell would be coming here and staying over here for weeks. And the more aggressive ones looked absolutely pissed. As if they were planning in their heads to ambush the blonde the moment he stepped onto their property. That even seemingly brought Kiba back to reality if the look of pure fury was anything to go by. Who's Bakugo, and did just saying his name made the room 100% more murderous? Ken asked awkwardly as he and his sister had no clue who Bakugo was. Kiba and Kyoka opened their mouths to no doubt slander Bakugo to the fullest, but thankfully Fu wrapped Kyosei's tendrils around both their mouths. Bakugo Katsuki is a bully who physically and mentally tormented Dad, along with pretty much all the other people at the schools Dad attended, Fu explained as objectively as possible. He's just a really unpleasant person who pretty much everyone here hates. Wait, he was a bully and he got into the hero course? Nara was taken aback and slightly outraged at this knowledge. How? That's a very long story that I can tell you later. Izuku sighed, feeling a headache coming on. But to answer your question, no, Bakugo will not be coming. This elected relief, happiness, and for some reason slight disappointment among the kids. Izuku could only imagine that the reason for that last one is because some of them were really looking forward to beating up Bakugo. Good. If he tried to do anything to Dad again, then we just have Kai sit on him again. Kei giggled, electing some laughs out of her siblings. That's right. I won't let anyone hurt Dad. Kai said confidently from outside. Izuku smiled slightly and shook his head. You guys, all right? You guys should go and clean your rooms. We wouldn't want our guests to come in and see you all have messy rooms, would we? No. Cried out most of the kids as they all left to do as Izuku told them, leaving Izuku with just his mother. Inko looked at her son and smiled. It seems things have gotten so much more lively. Yeah. Izuku smiled, then suddenly a card fell out of seemingly nowhere onto his bed. And it just never seems to stop. Izuku picked up the card. It was handmade. A blank sheet of paper that had been folded in two with the words, "Glad you're back." The handwriting was too good to be anyone's but Fuku's, and given where it came from he can only assume Mu had something to do with this as well. He opened it up and inside it read as such. Hi. It's Fuku. Everyone got really sad after you overworked yourself, so please don't do it again. I'll help out more if I need to. I don't want to see Eri and Case sad again. So don't be afraid to rely on Fuku, but if I mess up, please don't be too mad. And then written below that in much less impressive handwriting was, yeah, what she said. And at the bottom it said signed Fuku and Mu. Izuku frowned and sighed. I really caused everyone so much trouble. You made a mistake, honey. Inko reminded him gently, going over and caressing his head. It's time to fix it. Yeah. Izuku said. Time to fix it. Oh my god, it's huge. Mina shouted as she and her other classmates stood at the front gates of the Midoriya household, most of them with their mouths agape except for the 3 rich students and the 2 others who had seen it before. Yes, it is indeed a rather large house, Ida said while chopping the air. I mean, it would have to be considering it's meant to hold all those kids, Shoto added. I suppose this would be considered large for the average person. Momo didn't really have much of a frame of reference for these things. She knew her house was bigger than most people's, but if this was big enough to send most of the class into a stupor. All right, everyone, let's go. Achiko pumped her fist into the air. With fire in her eyes, she ran up to the intercom on the gates, her luggage floating next to her. Izuku, we're here. After a few moments, the gates opened up, allowing them to enter with all their luggage in tow. Whoa, look at that tree. Toru pointed at the grim tree with all its color-painted leaves. It's so pretty. I don't think I've ever seen a tree like that before. Momo took a closer look at it. Are those leaves fake? The kids made the leaves. Also, the tree is actually a grim, so don't do anything dumb or it will attack you. Achiko warned. Bruh. It's a tree. How does it attack? Kaminari asked. As if to answer that question, an apple dropped from the tree, screaming and chopping the air with its big teeth. Rah! 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 As it faded away, everyone stood silent for a moment as if to contemplate what the hell they just saw. Never mind, Kaminari said as he and a good chunk of the class moved away from the tree, walking quite a bit faster than they did before. Just gonna pretend that I didn't see that, Toru said as the rest of the class moved to catch their classmates. Before they reached the front door, it opened up and Fu, Nara, and Ken walked out. So, you guys are from the UA Hero course. Ken squinted at them, inspecting each one of the students. I expected Morak. Nara smacked her brother in the head before turning to Class 1A and giving them an apologetic bow. I'm so sorry about him. He's an idiot. It's an honor to meet you all. Yes, it is nice to see you all again. Fu nodded. Aw man, that kid is as monotone as ever, Kaminari commented. And still as cute. Mina giggled, suppressing her urge to glom. Nice to see you too, little man. Kirishima said. It's great to see you again, Fu. Achiko smiled kindly at the zombie boy before turning to Ken and Nara. And you two are Ken and Nara, right? Izuka said you two were the oldest ones under his care. That's right. The name's Ken, future #1 hero. Ken boasted as his sister rolled her eyes. Not when you have the IQ of a rock you won't, Nara smirked as her brother stuck out his tongue. My name is Nara, unfortunately, I'm his sister, but please don't let that lower your opinion of me. Well, you definitely act like siblings. Sue shook her head as she was briefly reminded of her own family's antics. It's lovely to meet the both of you. Am I to assume you're here to bring us to Midoriya? Momo asked the children. Yup, follow us, Fu said abruptly before turning around and walking through the door into the house with class following suit. After a brief walk through the house, getting lots of oohs and ahs from the class as they took a trip through what was essentially a mansion except for of course the rich kids until they reached Izuka's office. Man, this is a pretty snazzy place to work, Kaminari said as he walked over and inspected the desk. With a nice view too. Mina went over to the window and looked outside, squealing with glee. Ah! Look! It's Kiba's backyard. Forget her backyard. We're gonna be taking care of Kiba herself. Ah, she is such a queen. Toru squealed as well. Suddenly the 3 kids got squeamish. I wouldn't get too excited, Ken warned them. Kiba hasn't exactly been herself. That raised some concern among the class, particularly from the ones who watched Kiba like Mina, Momo, Kirishima, Toru, Kaminari, Sue, and of course, Achiko. Even Dark Shadow came out looking concerned. What happened to the little queen? Dark Shadow asked with big sad eyes. She didn't take Izuku's collapse well, Nara admitted tentatively. And even when she recovered, she didn't go back to acting the way she did before. She's more normal. But she always seems distracted by something. Even I don't know what's going on with her, Fu admitted with a slight pout. But it's concerning. Mina thought about what she just heard for a moment before giving a determined pout and pumping her fist. I bet she's still sad because her dad is sick. We're gonna have to cheer her up. Yeah, shouted the Kiba fans in the class. Well, good luck with that, Fu said, before walking over to the door that led to Izuka's room. But first let's talk to Dad. The zomboy opened the door and led Class 1A inside where they saw Izuku laying down on the bed with a seer and 2 bearing elves at his side. Hey, guys. Izuka gave them a weak smile before going into a small coughing fit. It's nice to see you all. Sorry I had to call you all here. I must have caused you all so much trouble. It was nothing, Achiko said real quickly before she went over to Izuku's side and started inspecting him. Have you been eating enough? Sleeping too? And please tell me you haven't been moving around. The doctor told you not to be moving for at least a week after you got out of the hospital. Oka's gone into concerned wife mode. Mina wisped a bit too loudly, but Achiko seemingly either didn't hear her or ignored her. I'm fine, I couldn't neglect my health even if I wanted to. The kids have been doting over me way too much. Izuka sighed. And these two aren't just here to help me out, they're also here to keep me from getting up. Good, I'll have to thank Yami for that. Achiko made a mental note to do that later. Hey there Midori. Nice to see you again. Mina greeted, giving him a friendly wave. Don't worry about pulling us from class. I was looking for a break anyway. While I am unhappy about our leave from school, I am more than glad to do so if it means helping children in need. Ida shouted. Indeed, and while we will be away from UA, we will be receiving school work from our teachers. Momo emphasized that last part, electing groans from her less academically motivated classmates as well as Ken. Well, in that case, I'll try not to give you too much work, Izuku told them. Nope. You're not lifting a finger. Achiko put her hands on her hips and gave him a stern look. We came here to work and that's what we're gonna do. Yeah. We're not getting paid to sit around. We're gonna work and work hard. Kirishima shouted. But maybe not too hard, Mineta added. Just make sure to leave enough time for us to train, Shoto told him in his typical disinterested tone. Well, alright then. I'll leave it up to you guys to divide the work. Izuku explained to them. But it will be a lot of work. Firstly, you'll have to feed all the children every day at breakfast, lunch, and dinner times, which means you have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get breakfast ready. Hui! Shouted out a few of the students. 5 in the morning. Mineta complained, looking like someone told him he had a terminal disease. Feeding the kids takes a while because you have to make all that food. That's 12 normal dishes along with feeding Fu and Kyosei their enormous amount of meat. You have to make Netsu's food in a very specific way so he doesn't burn it while eating. Kai's food needs to be delivered in front of his room in a very specific way, and you also have to give Shiruku her combination of human flesh and dead spiders. Izuku explained. Ugh. Toru's face contorted in disgust, not that anyone could see it. And you also have to make sure they have snacks that they can eat throughout the day stocked in the fridge. Izuku continued. Speaking of stocked, you'll also have to keep stock of not just the food, but all the supplies that are needed around the house. There is a comprehensive list of that in my drawer. I had Mom label it for you. The seers should be able to help. Hearing its name, the seer made its weird clicking noise that creeped a few of the students out. Yeah, what is that thing? Kaminari asked, looking thoroughly unnerved. It's creepier than normal Grim, somehow. Oh, this is a seer. Izuka pointed at the orb Grim. They can act kind of like a combination of moving phones and security cameras. I have a bunch of them patrolling the house and the forest around the house, and they'll warn you if anything's wrong, like if one of the kids broke something or if there is an intruder. You can also use them to check on things, keep watch of all the kids, and help count inventory, as well as a variety of other things. They're the most useful Grim by far, so you should keep one by at least one of you at all times. Many of the students didn't look too thrilled about this. Alright, but getting back to what you were talking about before. What tasks will we have to do while working here? Momo asked. Izuka took a deep breath. Well, besides food and inventory, you'll also have to deal with house maintenance. Inspect the house for any damages and make sure everything is in working order, and if there are any issues, you'll have to call someone to fix it. This will mostly consist of one of the kids breaking and destroying something and you having to replace or fix it. Also, you'll have to deal with all the appropriate paperwork that comes with repairing and maintaining parts of the house. Also, you'll have to manage their education, come up with lesson plan for all of them, and then teach them in one of the classrooms. You'll also have to give personal lesions to Fukunoko and Mu because they're too shy to work around others. Although maybe that's changed for Fuku, you'll have to check. On top of that, you'll have to tutor the kids who didn't fully understand your lesson and make sure they do. Also, you'll have to handle requests from the children for certain objects at the end of every week. Also, you'll have to keep up and support all the kids' hobbies. Also, you'll have to help with pretty much all the kids' quirk training. If the kids get into a fight that's not sparing, then you'll have to break it up and punish them before making them get along again and cheering them up later. If one of the kids has a personal issue, you'll either have to deal with it yourself or bring them to me. And you'll also have to deal with my financial paperwork, managing the money that comes in from the government, as well as managing the money I'm sending to my mother's company, selling Shiruka's leftover webbing, selling Fu's intact remains, as well as other things of which you will find a comprehensive list of in my desk. Also, you'll have to maintain the forest. The kids like to play and train there, so it almost constantly needs to be repaired, replanting trees, filling holes, etc. This of course will require you to make a few calls and fill out the necessary paperwork. And dash. That's about it. Izuku finally finished. Class 1A as well as Ken, Nara, and even Fu were all looking at him in shock. Achiko was the first one to break out of her stupor. You were doing all that? By yourself? Achiko shouted at him and raged. Izuku winced under her gaze. If you weren't recovering, I would slap you. How did you even manage to do all that for as long as you did? Momo asked in a mixture of amazement and disbelief. A mix of determination, good time management, and good pain tolerance, Izuku explained. Dude, that's manly but also too much. Kirishima shouted. Midoriya. Knowing one's limits is an important part of life. While I admire your determination, you should have hired help to take on this workload long ago. Ida chided. Yeah, man, when you needed pain tolerance just to do your job, that's when you should have figured it was time to take a break, Zero told him. I get it. Izuku sighed. I was being dumb. But that's in the past and we need to move forward. Momo nodded. He's right. Scolding Midoriya now won't do us much good. We need to divide this work among all 19 of us. Actually, Mom is here too. She's in the kitchen cooking lunch right now. Izuku told them. She's been very insistent on helping, so if you need help with pretty much anything, then she'll be there. Then we'll have to give her our thanks when we see her. Ida shouted before turning to the class. Now, how many of you know how to cook? Sato, Aoyama, and Azui raised their hands. All right, only 3 for including Mrs. Midoriya. Ida thought about it for a moment. I'm not sure that's enough. Hey, don't forget about the people that live here. Nara reminded them. Yanda and Yami have helped out in the kitchen before. They can be there to help you guys if you need it. Actually, that might be for the best. It's good if they learn how to cook for themselves and it keeps them active. Sue pointed out. I see. In that case, we'll ask the children how many of them want to help. Ida determined. But aside from the volunteers, Azui, Aoyama, and Sato will be in charge of the cooking alongside Mrs. Midoriya. I can help with house maintenance. Achiko piped up. My parents run a construction company. Actually, they work for Izuku, so I should be able to deal with all the construction stuff and the paperwork. I see, then I'll put you in charge of that. However, I would like Shoji and Jiro to assist you. I believe their quirks are the most suited for these tasks. Ida said. I'll do my best, Shoji said. I'll try not to mess it up. Jiro seemed a bit less sure, but it's not like she was gonna refuse. Koda, I think you could use your animals in combination with the seers to better inspect the forest, Momo told the quietest member of the class. Koda nodded, still not saying a word as usual. Yaoyorozu and I will handle the lesson plans. Ida said. Mina, Azui, you two strike me as people who are good with children. Could you two handle teaching the children? Of course. Mina immediately rose to the challenge. I may not be the smartest, but I can teach a bunch of grade schoolers. I think I'll want to help you with the lesson plan. You might make it a bit too intense for them, Azui told them. Oh, and can I help too? I love dealing with kids. Toru requested. If you insist. Ida agreed. Now for quirk training. I'll help Eri. Achiko immediately volunteered. Her issue is power control, right? I had that same problem. I think I can help her out the most. Agreed. Sato, can you help Kiba with her restraint training? Momo asked. I'll do my best. Sato agreed. Is anyone here into horror movies? Izuku abruptly asked. I am. Why? Mina was happy to share her love of horror movies, but she was a bit confused as to where that question came from. Fukanoko's training consists of her watching horror movies and trying not to activate her quirk, Izuku explained. So it would be best if you were the one to handle her training. That's the fear gas girl, right? Mina seemed a bit hesitant. I'm gonna have a gas mask for this, right? Of course, Suzuka answered quickly. Okay, then it should be fine. Mina still seemed a bit tentative. We'll get along like 2 peas in a pod. Lastly, we have Netsu. Momo turned to Shoto. Todoroki, can you dash? No. Shoto quickly refused. Everyone was kind of taken aback by his sudden refusal, and so the bicolored boy explained. I don't use my fire. Therefore, I have nothing to teach him. Shoto said curtly. Wait, I thought his quirk made ice? Fu asked, slightly confused. His quirk is half cold, half hot. From his right side, he can make ice, and from his left, he can make fire. Izuku explained to the kids. It's a very powerful quirk, but he only uses the ice for some reason. What? Why? Ken asked, confused as to why anyone would limit themselves like that. That's none of your business, Shoto said, his voice cold with a bit of an edge to it. Geez, you're such a grump. Mina scolded. Yeah, kinda unmanly, Kirishima added. Shoto just stayed silent, stoic, and stubborn. Well, if you won't train Netsu then, who will? Momo asked. No one else had any sort of fire-based power except Ken, and he wasn't exactly a master of controlling Heat Blast's abilities either. I suppose I will teach him. Tokoyami volunteered. I too have a great power I must control lest I destroy all around me. Perhaps my experience can assist him. I suppose that is the best option we have. Momo gave Shoto a questioning look, but the frosty body just gave her the cold shoulder. And with that taken care of, Kirishima, Achiko, Tokoyami, Todoroki, Siro, Sato, Mineta, and I will be in charge of handling any fights or outburst from the children. Given how powerful they are, I believe we are the most equipped to take them down quick, and with harming either the children or ourselves. Most of the people Momo listed seemed up for this, however, Mineta seemed more than a little upset. Ah man, why am I on the front lines in case one of these nuclear toddlers has a meltdown? Mineta mentally bemoaned. Alright, with that in mind. Uraraka volunteered to handle the paperwork involving construction, but will also need people to handle the various other types of paperwork. Ida pointed out. I feel the best people to be assigned to this are myself, Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, and Mineta. Keeping Mineta away from the kids, good idea Ida. Through the girls collectively. And we can all do standard house chores such as cleaning, laundry, and washing dishes. So if anyone is available they can take care of those tasks. Momo told everyone. There was a general murmur of agreement among the students. Alright, now I think it's time I introduced you all to the children. Izuka decided as he leaned over to the seer. Gather all the kids in the backyard. It's time they meet our guest. After a few minutes, everyone had gathered in the backyard. Izuku was still in a wheelchair, being handled by none other than Achiko. Class 1A were faced opposite to the children, with most of them giving off warm smiles. Inko was also present, standing next to the children. Everyone, this is Class 1A. They already know who you all are, so there is no need for introductions. Izuku explained. Hello, children. Some of you may remember me, but to those who don't remember me, I am UA Class Representative Tenya Ida. Ida introduced himself. And I am Vice Representative Momo Yaoyorozu. Momo went next. I am Yuga Aoyama. Aoyama said while doing an overly flamboyant pose, and I dash. I'm Mina Ishido. You can just call me Mina. Mina said while moving in front of Aoyama and giving Kiba an eager grin. And I'm president of Class 1A's Kiba fan club. Hey, we never agreed on that. I want to be the president. Toru objected. Yeah, just saying you're the president without talking to the rest of the club is really unmanly. Kirishima crossed his arms and gave Mina a disapproving look. Yeah, as the person who met Kiba first, I should be the president. Achiko insisted. Wait, when was there a club? Momo asked, confused as to when this started. While the Kiba fan club bickered, Kiba herself looked unsure. Oh, thank you all for watching me. That caused them all to stop and look at the girl oddly. It was easy that Kiba was not acting like herself, and they wondered what exactly was causing this huge shift in personality. While the Kiba squad was stunned, the rest of the class took the time to introduce themselves. And while they did, Kyoko was staring at them while hiding behind Kai. She didn't trust these people as far as she could throw them, and given her tiny body that wasn't very far. Especially that guy with the twin-colored hair. He looked so condescending. And she really didn't trust the short ball-haired guy for some reason. But her daddy needed the help. He tried so hard to do it all by himself and it hurt him so bad. And these people were friends with Achiko, so that gave them at least a little bit of credit. She would see how these people did. And if they tried anything funny, she would tell her father straight away. Kyoko would be more vigilant. She had to be. She wouldn't allow something to hurt her family like this again. While many of his classmates may have had an issue with waking up at 5 and immediately getting to work, but not Sato, he was always an early riser. Often using his mornings to work out. Although now he doubted he had time for that. After all, he had a lot of food to make. Alright. Sato stood in the kitchen looking at his helpers. Azui and Aoyama were of course here as they were both assigned to help. Inko was also present as Izuka said she would be. Some kids had also come. Fu and Sanson felt like helping, and since they never had to sleep, they didn't have a problem waking up so early. Yanda and Yami had been helping out the whole time anyway. Yanda out of a sense of wanting to be useful, and Yami for the same reason and also because he wanted to learn how to cook. Nara was also present as she felt a sense of responsibility, although her brother was nowhere to be found. Fuku didn't join them as she no longer felt it was as necessary as before. Alright. So today we're gonna be making tamago cake gohan with some vegetable toppings. Sato declared. Yami, can you take care of giving Kai his food? The frightful child nodded and left to go order his Grim to airdrop Kai's food to him. Fu, can you get your food from the fridge? Sato asked the zombie boy. Yes, we can. Cold doesn't affect us much, Fu said before walking towards the fridge. Right, Sanson, your body can stretch around the whole kitchen so you stay on standby and get us what we ask for, Sato told the slime girl as she gave him a big cartoon thumbs up. I can also be in multiple places at once. Nara turned to her Omnitrix and selected an alien. And then after a flash of pink light, she transformed into Ditto. Watch. Nara's body then seemingly split in two, creating a duplicate of herself. That's great. How many clones can you make? Sato asked her. 20, Nara answered, her voice cartoonishly high-pitched. I can only do this for 10 minutes though. That should be all we need, Sato said. 15 of you can go set up the tables and deliver the meals, and you can keep 5 clones here to help cook. On it. Nara nodded. Everyone else, get ready to cook, Sato shouted as he raised his fist into the air. Yes, Chief, cried everyone. MH. Man, this is good, Kaminari said as he and many of his other classmates, as well as the children, just destroyed their meals. Yee. Thififker what? Mina said with a mouthful of food. Ashido. Do not talk with your mouth full, Ida scolded. But you are correct. You all did an excellent job with the cooking. Yes, Sato, nice job. Achiko praised the muscle-bound cook as she ate. Don't give me all the praise, everyone did their part. Sato looked to his helpers. You all did amazing. Couldn't have made as much food without you guys. I'm used to making food for my siblings already, so I'm kinda used to having to do things like this, although this was obviously on a much bigger scale, Su said. Moi. Obviously, I am able to cook, Aoyama said, flamboyant. Myself in the kitchen is a dazzling sight to see. Man, you were like a living stereotype, huh? Ciro asked the Frenchman. It was fun, Yonda said while she had a mouthful of food. Pretty much everyone was satisfied except for 2. Ken and Kiba, neither of whom liked vegetables all that much. Ugh. Ken groaned as he looked at his food before his sister, who was sitting next to him, kicked him in the leg. Ow. Don't be rude. People worked hard to make this, Nara aggressively whispered to him while giving him a fierce glare. And they're good for you. They don't taste like it, Ken grimaced. Kiba didn't complain, she just made a very sour face as she scarfed down her food as fast as possible to get it over with. She may not like it, but she didn't want to be a bother. Hey, where's Kyoku? Kei asked. She went to go eat with your father, dear. Inko smiled. She said she didn't want him to be alone. Kei gasped. That's a great idea. Mr. Sato, can we take our food and eat with Daddy? You don't have to ask me. I just make the food, you can eat wherever you want, Sato told them. With an eager grin, Kei lifted her bowl and ran out to go to Izuku, with Eri deciding to follow her. Fu looked at Kiba, who looked like she wanted to join them but didn't. Kiba, what the heck is going on with you? Fu thought. Hey, Dad. Achiko was currently in Izuku's office looking over some reports. Oh hey honey, what's going on? Her father asked, slightly concerned. I've called you at least a dozen times, but you ain't been answering? You haven't heard? Achiko cringed. Izuku collapsed. What? Achiko had to move away from the phone. It's okay, she quickly reassured him. He's not gonna die or anything, but he's just really weak right now. She heard her father breathe a sigh of relief. Thank goodness. What on earth brought that boy down? Overwork, Achiko answered. Oh yeah, that'll do it, her father said. That boy has a heart of gold, but the human body can only take so much charity. And Lord knows the world doesn't make being kind an easy thing to do. And he never knows when to stop. Achiko sighed soundly, slightly agitated. And how do you feel about that? Her father asked. I feel frustrated, Achiko vented. Pretty much everyone he met treated him like crap. And then it finally seems like he gets to have the life he deserves, and he just sabotages himself. And I'm just so angry. He's such a wonderful person and he cares for everyone. Everyone but himself. He thinks of the people that bully him more than himself. And that's just, Achiko's head slammed into the desk as she took a moment to just let her frustrations seep out. So he's that type, huh? Her father said. Listen, Achiko, Midoriya has what they called a bleeding heart. It pours and pours for everyone else, but eventually he'll be left with nothing for himself. Listen, honey, you can't leave people like him alone for too long. They'll end up killing themselves one way or another eventually. Don't say that, Achiko shouted. That thought sent shivers down her spine. The thought that Izuku cared for himself so little that no matter what happened if you left him alone for too long. It's the truth, dear. A man who holds no love for himself can't stand on his own. Achiko's father said. He needs people to teach him how to care for himself, dear. And I know those kids love him a whole bunch, but a lot of them need just as much help as he does. And I don't even know where his parents are. His mom's here, Achiko told him. But she can only be here for so long. She has a company to deal with overseas. You know financial security is important. Sure do, her father said. But that leaves Midoriya with no one who can stop him from running himself into the ground. No one but you. Dad, you know I have to focus on my studies. Achiko reminded him gloomily. I'm not saying monitor his every move, I'm just saying you should pop by every now and again. He's not the kind of guy to ask for help, so you may have to force it down his throat a bit. Her father explained. Just remind him that he better look after himself, otherwise you'll kick down his door and whoop his ass. Achiko giggled a bit. I thought you'd want me to stay away from boys. Her father laughed with her. In most cases, yeah. But remember what you said about financial security. Well, ours kinda goes down the drain if he dies, so it's for everyone's sake that you make sure he's still kicking. Also, I won't lie. Boy made a good first impression. Determined, hard-working, heart of gold. And he's rich. Honey, if you want to lock that down, I won't get in the way. Daddy, it's not like that. Achiko's face turned bright red. He's just a friend. I'm just saying, sweetheart, there are a lot worse picks. Her father said. Yeah, I know. Achiko said. But enough about that. Me and my classmates are kinda trying to help him out while he's recovering, so we also have to take care of the house maintenance. Sanson just melted some of the stairs, so do you think could repair those and help out with the paperwork? Of course, darling. We'll get right on it. Her father said. All right. See you soon. Bye. Achiko hung up. The brunette looked up and saw Momo standing in the doorway, staring at her with paper in her arms and a slight smile on her face. Oh, Momo. I didn't see you there. Achiko blushed a bit at not noticing her classmates standing there for presumably a little while. How long were you standing there? Near the beginning of the phone call. I apologize for eavesdropping, but your phone call was not something I'd experienced before. Momo told her. You haven't had a phone call with your dad? Achiko raised her eyebrow, giving her a confused look. No, I have. Plenty of them. Momo told her. But it's not like yours, Uraraka. Can I tell you something? Of course. Never be afraid to speak your mind, Vice Rep. Achiko gave her a kind, reassuring smile. We're friends after all. Momo returned her smile with the same warmth, albeit a bit shakier. I'm not used to this level of casualness. I was raised in a very proper home and in very proper schools. It wasn't terrible or even all that bad necessarily, it was just very slightly uncomfortable in a way I never noticed up until now. This casual feeling, it's relaxing. That's why I was caught up in your conversation with your father. It was so different from my own. Oh, well, it's fine then. Achiko excused her. Just try not to lurk next time. I'll keep that in mind, Momo said. Also, if you have free time, do you think you could help me with these papers? Sure, Achiko told her. That's what friends are for. All right, everyone. And that's it for today's biology lesson. Mina said, standing in the front of the classroom to all the children sitting in the chairs. Does anyone have any questions? Sue asked. Kay raised her hand. Yeah, Kay. Mina called on her. You said boobies are there so women can give milk to their babies. Right? Kay asked. That's right, Kay. I'm so glad you understand. Mina petted her snakes proudly. But why are they all different sizes? Kay asked curiously. Ms. Yumomo has really big boobies and Ms. Jiro has almost no boobies. Mina tried her hardest not to laugh, as and was failing horribly while Sue just rolled her eyes. That's a part of genetics, Sue explained. We were going to go into that tomorrow, but I guess we can give you a preview of it now. Sue then went up to the chalkboard and spent a few minutes drawing an image. On the left side of the board was a woman and on the right was a man. Both had arrows next to them that pointed to a wheel. Genetics are a big part of what makes you, Sue explained. Genetics come from your mother and your father, your birth parents, that is. Not Izuku. And when you're being created inside of your mother's bellies, those genetics are randomly shuffled around until they finish creating you. Your hair color, your height, weight, skin color, breast size, eye color, your quirk, and some parts of your personality are all chosen by genetics. Think of it like a big wheel, and when you spin it, it randomly decides what traits you get. And the genetics you get from your mother and father decide what's on that wheel. So people get lucky and some people don't, Mina told them. Momo hit the genetic jackpot. Jiro did too, in every place except for her breast size. But don't tell her I said that. She's really sensitive about her itty-bitties. Mina, Sue said while looking at the open doorway. The door. Ha! Mina looked behind her at the doorway and froze because she saw Jiro standing there, giving her a very menacing look with her earlobes raised. Hey Jiro. Mina started sweating nervously, trying to back up only to stumble into a desk. Why you were just hanging around? Jiro didn't say a word, she just slowly started advancing. Hey Jiro. I was just answering a question, it's not my fault. Mina tried to defend herself. Itty bitties, Jiro repeated with venom gushing from her tone. Mina gulped as the rocker approached her. Kids, save me. Some of the kids got up to come to her aid, but Sue raised her hand to stop them. Kids, don't. This is a lesson about watching what you say and the consequences if you don't. So you traitor. Mina shouted as Jiro descended upon her. It was just a joke. It was just a joke. Ah. And thus it was quickly decided the next lesson would be on how to deal with stab wounds. You're doing it, Eri, you're doing it. Achiko chanted as she watched Eri try to turn off her quirk. Eri breathed in and out rapidly, struggling as she tried to control the wild bull that was her quirk. Ag. Ma. Her horn kept shrinking back into her head. It would sometimes move a centimeter back up as it resisted Eri's will to try and keep on going, but Eri was more determined than ever. After a few minutes, the strange energy her horn emitted ceased, and a few seconds later, Eri finally managed to get her horn back to its default position. Once this was done, Eri flopped back onto the floor, breathing heavily. Good job, Eri. Achiko applauded her. This is the third time you turned your quirk on and off today. Izuka said you normally can only do it once on a good day. Thank you, Achiko, Eri said between breaths as she struggled to keep her eyes open. I need to work really hard to control my quirk and help people. Ah. Achiko cooed as she picked up Eri and started petting her head exactly as Izuku instructed. You're such a nice girl, Eri. But it's time for you to rest. You look really tired. Eri pouted and shook her head and forced herself to sit up. No. I need to control it. Don't overdo it, Eri. It's gonna be a long time until you can fully control your quirk. Achiko told her, picking her up to put her in bed. Eri weakly struggled in Achiko's arm. No. I need to control it. Achiko frowned. Eri, what's going on? Why are you being so stubborn? The horned girl pouted. If I could use my quirk, I could fix Dad. And he'd never have to be like that ever again. Oh. Achiko felt like an idiot. Of course, that's what would be the problem. It was so obvious. It must have been so frustrating to have the power to fix a problem so important to you and just not have been able to use it. At the very least, she didn't try to fix Izuku in her current state. That likely would have gone very poorly. But now Achiko needed to get this girl to sleep before she made herself sick from exhaustion. And she knew she would need to get some help. Izuku was currently working on papers in his bed with his two grim apes next to him when the door opened. What on earth are you doing? Izuku sighed as he saw Achiko enter the room with Eri in her arms. Hello, Achiko. You to Eri. Both Eri and Achiko wore pouts on her face, Eri because she still wanted to continue training and Achiko because Izuku was working on his break. I am dealing with some papers involving the QRD, Izuku explained. We can talk about that after we talk about why my little unicorn is pouting. Achiko looked hesitant to let this go for now but ultimately relented. She moved towards the bed, plopping Eri right next to Izuku and standing next to her to make sure she didn't try to just roll off and escape. She has been working very hard on controlling her quirk. She managed to turn it on and off 3 whole times. Izuku gave a forced gasp although he was a bit surprised he over-exaggerated it for Eri's sake. 3 whole times. That's amazing, Eri. Eri found herself cuddling into Izuku's side against her will, her own body betraying her. But the problem is she's very tired but wants to keep going so she can master her quirk faster. Achiko shook her head. Because she wants to heal you the next time you get sick. She's overworking herself like father like daughter. Oh, Eri. Izuku gave her a gentle smile and brought her into his embrace. Rest is important. Trust me, I tried to keep working and ignoring my body and I ended up like this. You can't do that, Eri, that's a no-no. But I want to fix you, Eri muttered. I know. You're such a good girl. Such a kind, pure-hearted girl. Izuku told her. But you need to know your limits. I can keep going, Eri whispered, a yawn following soon after. Oh really? Izuku gave her a slightly mischievous smile. Well, if you can stay awake for a whole 2 minutes, then you can keep training. Deal? Deal. Eri's eyes flew open, however, she quickly found she had to fight to keep them that way. You really think you can do it? Izuku asked, getting a nod from her. Even if I hold you real close? Izuku brought the girl up to his chest, holding her right against his chest. And not fair. Eri's eyes were half closed as she absorbed the warmth of Izuku's touch. It was so soothing that she quickly found that even fighting at her hardest wouldn't be enough. What about if I pet your head like this? Izuku brushed his hand through her hair. Eri didn't even have the time to protest as she quickly closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Izuku and Achiko looked at Eri's adorable sleeping form before Achiko looked up back at the paperwork Izuku was doing and frowned again. The green-haired teen looked up at her and sighed. Look, I know what you're gonna say, Dash. Then why are you doing it? Achiko whispered aggressively. You know you shouldn't be working right now. This is QRD work. This is important work that contains classified information. Izuku's tone was dead serious and told Achiko that he wasn't ashamed in the slightest of what he was doing. I can't hand this over to a bunch of people I just met. And while I trust you and Mom, neither of you know enough about this for you to make decisions this important. Not to mention I would have to send in an advance notice saying that you have permission to make this decision in the first place, and that would take far too much time. Well, can't you just put it on hold until you recover? Achiko asked him. How would you feel if you had to stay 3 more weeks in a bunker, unable to see the outside or even your family because the person responsible for releasing you was being an idiot? Izuku told her. It's important work, and I can't put it to the side unless I absolutely have to. Achiko didn't look convinced. Izuku sighed. Okay, it's the only real work I'm doing. And it's reduced. I'm only really doing this for an hour a day. Uraraka continued to give him a look, judging his words for a minute before relaxing and giving a long sigh. Well, don't overdo it. I'll be watching you now. So don't think you can get away with overdoing it. I won't. Izuku looked down at Eri, sleeping at his side. I'll try my best for her. For all of them. It was late at night and most of Class 1A was asleep. All except for Shoto, who had done the least that day and as such was assigned to finish up some of the leftover paperwork that night. This is extremely tedious. Todoroki had never felt so bored in his life. His father had always been particularly upset after he did the stack of paperwork he had to do as a high-ranking hero, and for once Shoto understood something about his father. Knock. Knock. Shoto looked up, wondering who could be knocking at this time of night. Come in. The door opened and in came Kiba. Hi. Hello. What are you doing up? Shoto asked her. I wanted to ask you something. How much work is it to clean up the house when we break something? A lot, Shoto answered bluntly. It takes about half an hour to deal with even the smallest of things. It's ridiculous. How long does it take for the bigger stuff or multiple things? Kiba almost looked like she was afraid of the answer. I'd imagine hours. Not including the phone calls. Shoto told her. It's a lot of work. Shoto guessed the girl must have broken a lot of things because she looked extremely guilty. Like he'd never seen a child look this guilt-ridden before, not that he's seen a lot of children, mind you. After taking a few minutes to composure herself, Kiba looked back up at him and asked, can I see how much stuff got broken before Daddy got sick? Shoto gave that some thought. She was probably just being thoughtful and wanted to see how much damage she caused. Maybe this would help her be more mindful in the future. Sure. Why not? What's the worst that can happen? So what you're telling me is that Kiba, who was already feeling guilty about the amount of property damage she might have caused since she's been here, asked you to show her physical proof of this, and you just let her? Izuku asked, clutching his head as headaches assaulted him. Well, to be fair, I didn't think she'd caused that much property damage, Shoto said, defending himself. I thought it would motivate her to be more careful. I didn't think it'd cause her to react like that. Even though he said that Shoto could see now that he'd made a mistake. He figured that out when, while they were looking through the papers, Kiba burst into tears and ran out of the room. I'm so sorry for this, Midoriya. Momo and Ida were present alongside her classmate. I was aware that Todoroki was emotionally distant, but I didn't know he was this out of touch. Ida gave an apologetic bow on behalf of his classmate. We apologize on behalf of Class 1A. We sincerely apologize for causing this. Momo also bowed. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to rein in his headache. Okay, take me to her. Izuku was in a wheelchair being wheeled by Ida towards Kiba's room. Outside of Kiba's room were Fu, Nara, Ken, Netsu, Shiroku, Eri, and Kei. Daddy. Kei immediately ran over to Izuku and looked at him worryingly. Daddy, Kiba is acting weird. Yes, I heard. Izuku nodded. I'm going to see her now. Izuku looked at Ida. I'll wheel myself now. Are you sure that's wise? Ida asked him. Izuku nodded. I'll be fine. Please I think I'll need to talk to her alone. Ida looked hesitant but ultimately understood and backed off. With that, Izuku wheeled himself towards Kiba's door, looking at the concerned looks on his kids' faces. As he approached the door, he took a deep breath, readying himself for what he might see on the other side. He pushed the door open, and what he saw was odd. Kiba was just sitting on her bed, watching television. Hey Kiba, Izuku said as he wheeled himself in and closed the door behind him. Kiba looked over to him and winced with guilt. And it hurt Izuku so much to see her do that. Hi daddy. After she greeted him, Kiba almost immediately looked away. Izuku frowned and wheeled himself closer to her. I know you looked at the files. Why didn't you tell me? Kiba asked in a sad, low voice. I destroyed so much stuff. I didn't know I hurt you. No, sweetheart you dash, Izuku tried to explain but she interrupted him. Don't lie to me. Kiba suddenly shouted, looking tearfully at Izuku. You told us you were okay. But you weren't. You didn't tell me I was giving you so much work and hurting you. And now you're like this and it's my fault. Izuku was at a loss for words. He wanted to just say that it wasn't true, but clearly he had overused simple hand-wavy explanations like that. Meaning his only real option here was to be a bit truthful. Okay, I can't hide it from you anymore. You did give me a lot of work with all the things you broke. But that's part of why you're here. Why you're all here. Your quirks are very powerful and destructive, that's not any of your faults. Kai gives me a lot of work to do just by living here. Netsa constantly makes small burns everywhere and sets things on fire occasionally. Fukanoko's room needs to be constantly inspected and maintained to make sure there are no leaks. And all the work that goes into feeding you all is far more exhausting than you could ever be. But all that stuff can't be helped. Kai can't stop being big. Netsa can't stop being on fire. Fuku can't stop her gas. And we can't stop eating, but I can stop destroying things, Kiba argued. I just need to stay in here and be very careful. You can't just stay in here all the time, Kiba, Izuku told her. Are just not supposed to live your life because of Dash. You gave me my life. Kiba argued, causing Izuku to pause. I was never the queen of eternal darkness. When you found me I had nothing. I was a pathetic little girl dying on the ground. And before that I was a thief that hurt people just to stay alive. But you took me and Fu and you gave us a home, food, and a family. I live in a super big house, getting everything I want, getting to order around super cool monsters and play pretend with my brothers and sisters. All thanks to you. And I hurt you. Kiba started crying now, still refusing to look at Izuku. You gave me everything I could ever want and all I did was make your life harder and ask for more. Izuku tried to find the words to reassure her, but he was a bit too busy fighting back the massive feeling of guilt. He did this. If he had just hired some help, this would never have happened. I can't hurt from in here. So I'm staying in here. Kiba said, sniffling as tears still rolled down her cheeks. And I won't ask for anything. Kiba, Now Izuku was crying as well. Kiba, you can't stay in here. Kiba stopped responding entirely. Just sitting there with her back turned to Izuku. Kiba, look at me. Izuku tried to get to her, but she just wouldn't respond. After a few moments of silence, Izuku just wheeled himself over to her, leaned in, and wrapped his arms around her, bringing her into a gentle hug. I'll give you some time for now, but I want you to know you were never a burden to me and I never thought for a moment that my life would be better without you. I can say safely that if I never met all of you, my life would be so much darker. Kiba flinched after hearing that but still didn't respond. After a minute, Izuku separated from her and slowly wheeled himself out of the room. He took one last look at Kiba, hoping to see her looking back, but to his dismay, she was still turned away from him. With a sigh, he left her room, hoping that this would heal a bit with time. The next day had arrived and things didn't seem to improve. All of yesterday, Kiba had kept true to her word, never leaving her room except to eat, and that's it. When people came to talk to her, she would speak normally, not normal for her but rather how you would expect a normal person to speak. She had completely dropped her Queen of Eternal Darkness thing, and now she was just Kiba Midoriya, little girl. And now halfway through day 2 of this behavior, people were getting concerned that this may not blow over. So that is what led Fu to where he was, standing outside her door, ready to go inside. A few others before him had attempted to cheer her up, talk her into going back outside, sparing, or making a video. But nothing seemed to work. No one could do it. Not Eri, Kei, Netsu, Nara. None of them. And so as the one who's known her the longest, Fu decided he had to give it a shot. He went in and saw her on her bed watching TV when she turned and saw Fu enter the room. Oh, hi Fu. Hey. Fu greeted her with a wave. I've never seen her subdued like this. It's not like Kiba had never dropped her act before. She had from time to time, but never for very long and never like this. She was almost like a different person. So, do you really staying in here is better for Dad? Fu asked her. Kiba turned away and nodded. I can't make any more work for him here. Yeah, but you were making him and everyone else worry about you a ton. Fu pointed out. You know Dad blames himself for everything that goes wrong, so doing this only makes him feel worse. That bit of logic hit Kiba, making her wince and her face scrunch up in guilt as she thought about what Fu said. But he'll get over it. If I keep making him work, he might get even sicker next time. And then he might die. You know he has help this time, right? Fu asked her. He has Achiko's class right now and he's gonna hire help after they leave. That's not gonna happen again. But what if Daddy just does all the work himself anyway? Kiba argued irrationally. Why on earth would he hire employees just so he could do all the work himself? Fu asked her. Actually, that sounds exactly like something he would do, but hopefully that doesn't happen. Why would he let us work him to near death? Kiba countered. Daddy's too nice. Okay, I see what's going on. Fu thought. Kiba was always stubborn. If she got a thought in her head, it was rather difficult to get it out. Especially when she is scared. Because that's what this was. Kiba was just scared that she was the one who hurt Izuku and was now overreacting. And now she was determined to stick to her guns and stay in here because she was too scared of the alternative. Look, I get you're scared, Fu called her out. But Dash. I'm not scared. Kiba refuted. I'm being mindful. For once. All I do out there is cause problems. Why do you think Daddy scolds me the most? Like that time I argued with you guys about colors. And that time I threw a car at All Might. All those times I broke things. That time I hurt myself in the greenhouse. All those times I spread your insides across the house. I'm always doing something wrong. Oh, she really remembered all that. Fu thought, slightly surprised that Kiba bothered to think of those moments. Perhaps she was a bit more aware than he had given her credit for. Look, I get that you feel Dash. How can you get how I feel? Kiba glared at him. You can barely feel it all. And you are one of Daddy's favorites. He always trusts you and praises you, and you and Yami are always helping him. And you can use your quirk without destroying anything or breaking anything. How could you know how I feel? Okay. Clearly, this is worse than I thought. Fu looked for a way to reach her. So you're just gonna stay in here for the rest of your life? What about Kiba, Queen of Eternal Darkness? How are you gonna be a hero if you don't train? We both knew that was fake, Kiba said bitterly, and Fu detected a bit of hurt in her voice. I just called myself that to make myself feel better about the fact that I was cursed with a quirk that meant to hurt people, and my parents kicked me out because all I do is hurt the people who are supposed to take care of me. If Daddy weren't so nice, then he would have thrown me out already. Well, what about your channel? And your fans? Fu pulled out his last card. You said you weren't gonna ask for anything, so are you not gonna ask for anything to do your streaming? I'm just gonna stop streaming, Kiba said in a very, very low voice. As if she was still unsure of herself. I do a lot of stupid things while streaming. I hurt myself, I break things. I'll stop for Daddy's sake. That actually caused Fu's eyes to widen for a second. As he was really, really surprised by this. Kiba adored streaming. She did it pretty much every day. And it was clear to see how much fun she had while doing it. To give up something she loved so much, but she clearly looked unsure of this. She was saying this, but he wasn't sure if she meant it. But if it was affecting her deeply enough for her to say that, then she was beyond reaching, at least to just him. Besides, the Queen of Eternal Darkness is gone, Kiba said sadly. Well, then I'll leave you to it, Fu told her. But I know that Dad will never really be happy if you're not. So while you're sitting in here, ask yourself, are you happy? Kiba paused before turning away and muttering. I'm fine. Leaving Kiba with that thought, Fu left the room. Coming up with a plan. Kiba looked out the window at the starry sky in the night. A part of her wanted so badly to go out and do anything. She wanted to feel the night's cool air on her skin, see the moon shining brightly in the sky, and just run around and enjoy herself. But she couldn't, she reminded herself. Because what would happen if she went out there, did some stretches, and broke 20 trees or something? Izuku would have to do a lot of work to replace each and every one of those trees. Or maybe she'd throw a rock through the house and make holes in 15 walls. Which Izuku would also have to fix. Oh, actually Achiko's classmates would fix those. Maybe she'd bring them to collapse too. Izuku didn't mind if he got hurt. But if she hurts others? Maybe then Izuku would finally have enough and kick her back out onto the street like her parents did. That thought alone was enough to make her sit still and stay in her room and watch TV. Although, being honest, this had gotten pretty unenjoyable a while ago. After a few hours of just sitting in a room, she got this itch. To go outside her room. To run around, spar a bit, play some games. Not that she could do any of that. She could literally destroy a wall by pressing on it with a bit of effort. Creating hours of work for her father. But here, in her room specifically made for her, reinforced to make it harder to destroy, she was fine. And Izuku would be fine. Even if she was bored and sad and more than a little bit lonely, she'd get used to it. Fukunoko lived like this, so why couldn't she? I'll get used to it, Kiba thought, curling up into a ball on her bed. Ignoring her urges to get up and do anything. I have to. In the cafeteria, a group of people calling themselves the Turn Kiba Back to Normal Squad had gathered. This group consisted of kids such as Eri, Kei, and Fu, as well as members of Class 1A such as Achiko, Mina, Toru, and Kirishima, and of course, Izuku himself. And so that's how it was. Fu finished explaining what happened with Kiba. Damn that Todoroki, I'm going to melt him so hard. Mina cursed. Please don't. Izuku sighed. This was clearly a long time coming. Kiba has always been more problematic than the others. It's true I've had to scold her far more than any of the other children, and she caused far more property damage and destruction than all the children combined. And while I would have kept hiding that, Kiba isn't an idiot and she is more observant than I gave her credit for. She would have come to this conclusion at some point, however my collapse just made things worse. If anyone should be blamed for this, then it's me. Achiko gave Izuku a conflicted look. On one hand, he should feel bad for letting this happen to himself and the kids by extension. On the other hand, he was being really hard on himself. So in the end, she just put a comforting hand on his shoulder, not telling him that he was wrong, but providing some level of reassurance. I don't know if Kiba is gonna stay like this forever, but she is definitely determined to try. And that means this may last a while. But she's gonna hate that. Kiba hates standing still the most. Actually, Sanson hates it the most, but Kiba's a close second. Kei said. Yeah, and she's gonna suffer for however long she stays like this. Mina pointed out. We need to find some way to make her realize she has to leave her room, Eri asked. I think I can help. Everyone looked to the source of the voice and found that it was Fukunoko standing there in her hoodie. Fuku, Izuku said with slight disbelief. He'd never seen her walk into and stay in a room with this many people, and she spoke up. I don't like this new Kiba. Fuku admitted. She reminds me too much of me. And I hate it. We need to get the old Kiba back immediately. Wow, Fuku. You really fired up. Kei smiled at her, her snakes giving a pleased hiss. Yeah, girl. Mina cheered on the normally shy child. So do you have a plan? Toru asked her. Yeah. Fuku looked the other way, not wanting to see all of them looking right at her. But it's gonna take some time. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, share the video, and support the original writer. See you in the next video.